The town wanted her gone. The man they gave her to was already half dead. Eliza Vance stood in the dust outside the general store, watching the women turn their backs. 3 weeks widowed, penniless, and about to be married off to a cripple nobody wanted. Cole Harrow, the rancher who couldn't walk, couldn't work, couldn't fight back. They'd sold his land out from under him piece by piece, and now they were giving him a wife like a final insult. She had 2 choices: marry a broken stranger or starve in the street. This is a story of survival, secrets, and the fight to reclaim everything they tried to take. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Eliza Vance became a widow, the sky was the color of old iron, and the wind carried the smell of coming snow. She stood beside a grave that wasn't deep enough, watching 2 men she didn't know shovel frozen earth onto a pine box that wasn't sealed properly. Her husband, if you could call him that after only 11 months, had died 3 days prior from a fever that turned his skin yellow and his breath to rattling gasps. The doctor hadn't come. Doctors didn't come for men who owed money all over town. The preacher spoke quickly, his words clipped and dutiful, eyes already drifting toward the road. No one else attended. The women of Crestfall had made their position clear. Eliza was an outsider, her late husband a fool, and her presence an inconvenience they tolerated only because propriety demanded it. When the last shovel of dirt hit the coffin, the preacher touched his hat brim and walked away without meeting her eyes. Eliza remained at this graveside until the diggers left, until the cold seeped through her thin shawl and made her fingers ache. Then she walked back to the boarding house alone, her boots crunching through patches of frost, her mind already calculating the impossible mathematics of survival. She had $4.30. The boarding house wanted $6 a week. Her husband had left debts she couldn't begin to count, debts that now, by the cruel custom of frontier law, became hers. The dressmaker wouldn't speak to her. The grocer's wife had made it clear she'd get no credit. And this morning, when she'd tried to inquire about washing work at the hotel, the manager had looked through her as if she were made of glass. The room she returned to smelled of carbolic soap and old wood. She sat on the narrow bed and looked at her hands. Rough, capable hands that had scrubbed floors and wrung out laundry and kneaded bread since she was 10 years old. Hands that had nursed a dying man and received nothing but bills in return. There was a knock at the door. "Mrs. Vance?" A woman's voice, tight and formal. Eliza opened the door to find Mrs. Cutler, the boarding house owner, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed over her considerable bosom. Behind her stood Mr. Davies, one of the town selectmen, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the expression of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary task. "May we come in?" Mrs. Cutler didn't wait for an answer, sweeping past Eliza with Mr. Davies following like a nervous shadow. Eliza closed the door. "What can I do for you?" Mr. Davies cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, I'll be direct. Your late husband's debts amount to approximately $240. The creditors have agreed not to pursue legal action, provided certain arrangements are made." "I don't have $240. "We're aware of that." Mrs. Cutler's voice was crisp, "which is why an alternative has been proposed." Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of alternative? Mr. Davies pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "There's a man, Cole Harrow. He owns a ranch about 8 miles north of town. Substantial property, good water rights, decent grazing land. He's incapacitated, injured in an accident 2 years ago. Can't manage the place alone anymore." "He needs help," Mrs. Cutler added, "and you need a situation. The arrangement would satisfy your debts and provide you with a home." Eliza looked between them. "You're asking me to work for him?" "No." Mr. Davies adjusted his spectacles. "We're proposing a marriage, a practical arrangement that benefits both parties." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Eliza gripped the back of the chair. "You want me to marry a stranger?" "A marriage in name would give you legal protection," Mr. Davies said. "And it would give Mr. Harrow the help he requires. The creditors have agreed to consider your debt settled if you accept this arrangement. If you refuse—" He let the sentence hang. "If I refuse?" Mrs. Cutler's expression hardened. "Then you'll need to vacate this room by Sunday, and I imagine the creditors will be less accommodating about the debts." Eliza understood perfectly. Refuse, and she'd be homeless and hunted. Accept, And she'd be bound to a man she'd never met, sent to live on a failing ranch with a cripple who needed a nursemaid. "What happened to him?" she asked quietly. "Mr. Harrow. Accident with a horse," Mr. Davies said. "Crushed his leg. He's able to get around with a cane, but he can't handle the ranch work anymore. The place is going to seed. It's a waste, really. Good land like that." "Why doesn't he just sell it?" Something flickered across Mr. Davies' face, too quick to read. "He's a proud man. Stubborn. Won't accept that he can't manage alone. But the bank's been patient, and certain parties have convinced him that this arrangement is sensible." Eliza studied him. There was something off in the way he spoke, a careful choosing of words that suggested more than it revealed. But what choice did she have? She could question their motives, or she could survive. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Mrs. Cutler said briskly. "The ceremony will be at the courthouse, simple and quick. Then you'll go out to the ranch." "Tomorrow." Eliza's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Unless you have objections." She thought of the $4.30, of the debts that would follow her like hungry dogs, of the women in town who'd already decided she was beneath their notice. Tomorrow, next week, next month. What difference did it make? She was already drowning. At least this way she'd have a roof over her head while she drowned. "No objections," she said. Mr. Davies nodded, clearly relieved. "Good. 10 o'clock at the courthouse. Bring whatever belongings you have. A wagon will take you to the ranch afterward." They left quickly, as if afraid she might change her mind. When the door closed, Eliza sat down on the bed and stared at the wall. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger. Tomorrow she would leave this town that had never wanted her and go to a ranch she'd never seen. Tomorrow her life would become something else entirely. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that tears changed nothing. The courthouse was a squat brick building that smelled of dust and old paper. Eliza arrived wearing the only decent dress she owned, dark blue wool, carefully mended at the cuffs. Mrs. Cutler had loaned her a hat, more out of concern for propriety than kindness. Mr. Davies was waiting in the hallway, along with the county clerk and two witnesses Eliza didn't recognize. There was no sign of the groom. "He'll be along shortly," Mr. Davies said, checking his pocket watch. "The roads are poor this time of year." Eliza stood by the window, watching wagons pass on the street below. She felt numb, detached, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. In a few minutes, she'd speak vows to a man she'd never met. In a few hours, she'd be living on his ranch, bound to him by law and contract. The door opened. The man who entered was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't set in such rigid lines. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of slate. He leaned heavily on a cane, his left leg dragging slightly as he moved. He didn't look at Eliza. He looked at Mr. Davies. "Let's get this done," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. Mr. Davies made introductions. "Mr. Harrow, this is Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Cole Harrow." Cole glanced at her for the first time. His eyes swept over her face, quick and assessing, then moved away. No greeting, no acknowledgement beyond that single measuring look. The clerk opened his book. "If you'll both stand here." The ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. The words were perfunctory, stripped of any warmth or meaning. Eliza spoke her vows clearly, watching Cole's profile as he repeated his own responses in that same rough, emotionless voice. He didn't look at her once. When the clerk pronounced them married, there was no kiss, no joining of hands. Cole simply turned and limped toward the door. "The wagon's outside," he said over his shoulder. Eliza followed him into the cold morning air. A battered wagon stood at the hitching post, pulled by 2 mud-spattered horses. Cole climbed onto the seat with visible difficulty, his jaw tight with the effort. He didn't offer to help Eliza up. She climbed aboard herself, settling her small trunk behind the seat. They drove out of town in silence. The road wound north through scrubland and scattered pines. The sky was low and gray, threatening snow that hadn't yet fallen. Cole kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the reins despite the way his left leg was braced awkwardly against the footboard. Eliza studied him from the corner of her eye, the set of his shoulders, the hard line of his mouth, the way he held himself as if every movement required conscious control. After an hour, he spoke. There's a house, 3 rooms. Needs work, but it's sound. You'll have your own space. All right. I don't need mothering, I can manage fine. I understand. The cooking and cleaning need doing. Stock needs tending. That's what this arrangement is for. I understand, Eliza repeated. He lapsed back into silence, and she didn't push. She was beginning to understand the shape of this man's pride. Rigid, defensive, armored against anything that might be mistaken for weakness. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a housekeeper he could keep at arm's length. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise. It was bigger than she'd expected, a sprawling collection of buildings set in a wide valley with hills rising on 3 sides. The main house was log construction, solid but weathered. Beyond it stood a barn, a chicken coop, several sheds, and a bunkhouse with a sagging porch. Fencing stretched into the distance, much of it in poor repair. Cattle grazed in the far pastures, fewer than there should have been for land this size. Cole pulled the wagon up in front of the house and climbed down slowly, using the wheel for support. He gestured toward the door with his cane. Kitchen straight through, bedroom on the left is yours. I use the one on the right. Eliza carried her trunk inside. The house was dim and cold, the windows small and the furniture sparse. The kitchen held a cast iron stove, a rough table, and open shelving stocked with dented cans and cloth-wrapped parcels. Everything was functional but neglected. Dust on the shelves, ashes spilling from the stove, dishes piled in a wash basin. The bedroom he'd indicated was barely larger than the one at the boarding house, containing a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a single chair. The window looked out over the valley. Eliza set her trunk down and stood for a moment, taking it in. This was her home now, this stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, bound to a man who could barely look at her. She unpacked quickly, there wasn't much to unpack, and returned to the kitchen. Cole was sitting at the table, his cane propped against his knee, staring at nothing. I'll start dinner, Eliza said. He nodded without looking at her. She found beans, salt pork, and flour. The stove took some coaxing to light properly. While she worked, she was aware of Cole watching her, his expression unreadable. When the food was ready, she set 2 plates on the table and sat down across from him. They ate in silence. The beans were adequate, nothing more. Cole cleaned his plate methodically, then stood with effort and carried it to the wash basin. I'll be in the barn, he said. Don't wait up. He limped out, the door closing heavily behind him. Eliza sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the wind pick up outside. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, and banked the fire in the stove. Then she went to her small room and lay down on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. This was her life now, this house, this silent man, this vast empty land. She had no illusions about it being anything other than survival. But as she lay there in the darkness, she thought about the way Mr. Davies had hesitated when she'd asked why Cole didn't just sell the ranch. She thought about the careful phrasing, the sense of something left unsaid. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start paying attention, not just to the work that needed doing, but to the shape of things around her. There was a story here, underneath the obvious one, and Eliza had learned long ago that survival meant understanding the stories people didn't tell. Folk. The first week passed in a rhythm of work and silence. Eliza rose before dawn, started the fire, made coffee, and prepared breakfast. Cole ate quickly and left for the barn or the pastures, limping through his work with grim determination. She cleaned, mended, organized the chaos of neglect the house had fallen into. In the evenings, they ate dinner together without speaking. Then Cole retreated to the barn or his room while Eliza sat by the stove with mending or accounts. She learned his patterns. He was up before her every morning, already in the barn by the time she had coffee ready. He pushed himself relentlessly despite the obvious pain in his leg, refusing any offer of help with a curt shake of his head. He ate mechanically, as if food were fuel rather than pleasure. He never met her eyes for more than a second. On the 8th day, Eliza walked out to the pastures to bring him lunch. She found him at the fence line, hammering a new post into the frozen ground. His face was pale with effort, sweat dampening his collar despite the cold. His left leg was shaking. "I brought food," she said. He didn't stop hammering. "Leave it on the fence. You should rest." "I'll rest when it's done." "Cole, I said leave it." His voice was sharp, final. Eliza set the basket on the fence post and walked back to the house. But she watched from the kitchen window as he finally stopped, leaning heavily on the post he'd just set, his shoulders heaving. He didn't touch the food. After a few minutes, he picked up the hammer and started again. That night, she found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with his bad leg stretched out in front of him. He was massaging it roughly, his jaw clenched. When he saw her in the doorway, he stopped immediately and reached for his cane. "Dinner's ready," Eliza said. "I'll be there in a minute." She didn't move. "How long has it been like this?" "Like what?" "The leg. The pain." His expression went cold. "That's not your concern." I don't need your concern." He stood, using the cane for leverage. "I need you to cook and clean and stay out of my way. That's the arrangement. That's all it is." He limped past her, close enough that she could smell the sweat and dust on him, the faint scent of leather and hay. When he was gone, Eliza stood in the barn, looking at the hay bale where he'd been sitting. There was something broken in this man that went deeper than his leg, something that made him push away any hand that reached toward him. But she was beginning to see another pattern, too. Little things that didn't quite add up. It started with the supply ledger. Eliza found it on the third week, tucked into a drawer in the kitchen. It was a thick book with a cracked leather cover, pages filled with Cole's angular handwriting. She opened it, intending only to see what staples they were running low on, and found herself staring at entries that made no sense. October 12th. Wire, 200 feet, $8. October 19th. Wire, 200 feet, $8. October 26th. Wire, 200 feet, $8. 3 purchases of the same amount of wire in 3 weeks. She flipped back through the pages. More wire. Nails by the barrel. Lumber that should have rebuilt the barn twice over. Feed that should have sustained twice the cattle she'd counted in the pastures. She carried the ledger to the barn. Cole was repairing a harness, working the leather with careful, practiced movements. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza held up the book. "These supply orders..." His expression closed immediately. "What about them?" "You ordered 200 feet of wire 3 times in October. Where did it go?" "I used it." "For what? I haven't seen that much new fencing." "It's none of your concern." "The accounts are my concern if I'm managing the household," Eliza said carefully. "And these numbers don't make sense. The amount of lumber ordered versus what's actually been used, the feed quantities." "Are you calling me a liar?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "I'm trying to understand. You're trying to prove I can't manage my own ranch." He stood abruptly, nearly losing his balance. "You think because I can't walk right, I can't think straight either, just like everyone else in that goddamn town." "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." He grabbed the harness and limped toward the door. "Stay out of the books. Stay out of my business. Do your job and leave the rest alone." He slammed the barn door behind him, leaving Eliza standing with the ledger in her hands. But even as her cheeks burned with the sting of his words, her mind was working. That hadn't been the response of a man defending his competence. That had been the response of a man backed into a corner. She returned to the house and spent the evening going through the ledger more carefully. The pattern became clearer. Supplies ordered in amounts that far exceeded any reasonable use. Money paid out that should have shown results on the ranch. Repairs, improvements, expansions, but didn't. And the entries became more frequent after Cole's accident, after he'd started having trouble managing the work himself. Someone was taking advantage. But who? And was Cole aware of it, or was his pride preventing him from seeing what was happening under his own roof? Eat at. The answer arrived 3 days later in the form of a visitor. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw the horse coming up the road, a fine bay mare with elaborate tack. The rider was a man in his 40s, well-dressed in a wool coat and polished boots. He had the kind of face that belonged in a parlor, not on a working ranch, smooth, genial, with eyes that smiled before his mouth did. He dismounted in the yard with practiced ease and removed his hat. "Good morning. You must be Mrs. Harrow. Victor Hale. I work with your husband on ranch business." He extended his hand. Eliza dried her hands on her apron and shook it. His grip was firm, his palm soft. "Mr. Hale, is Cole around? I need to discuss some supply orders with him. He's checking the south fence line. He should be back in an hour or so." "Ah." Victor's smile didn't waver. "Well, perhaps I'll wait. It's a cold ride back to town. and your hospitality is a welcome respite." His eyes moved over her face, assessing and familiar in a way that made her skin prickle. "You know, I was delighted to hear Cole had finally accepted help. A ranch this size is too much for one man to handle alone, especially given his situation." "What kind of ranch business do you handle, Mr. Hale?" "Oh, a bit of everything. Supply coordination, contract negotiations, transport arrangements. Cole's been generous enough to trust me with the administrative side of things, while he focuses on the physical work." He gestured toward the house. "Might I trouble you for some coffee while I wait?" Eliza led him into the kitchen, her instincts prickling. There was something too smooth about this man, too practiced in his charm. She poured coffee and set it before him, then busied herself with cutting bread, keeping her hands occupied while her ears stayed sharp. Victor settled into the chair as if he owned it. "You've done wonders with the place already. It was quite neglected before you arrived. Cole's a proud man, sometimes too proud to ask for help when he needs it." He sipped his coffee. "How are you finding ranch life, Mrs. Harrow?" "It's an adjustment." "I'm sure it is. Quite a change from town living, but you seem capable." Cole's fortunate to have found someone willing to take on such a challenging situation. His tone suggested he knew exactly how this marriage had been arranged. "The situation suits us both." "Does it?" Victor's smile was knowing. "Forgive me, but I imagine you're still learning the rhythms of this place. The ranch business, the accounts, the arrangements Cole has in place. It can be overwhelming for someone without experience." There it was. The subtle probe, testing what she knew. Eliza set the bread knife down carefully. "I'm learning. If you ever have questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. I've been working with Cole for 2 years now. I know this operation inside and out." He paused, his eyes sharp despite his friendly tone. "In fact, I handle most of the financial dealings. Cole's injury makes it difficult for him to travel to town for business meetings, so I serve as his intermediary. It's an arrangement that's worked quite well. I'm sure Cole appreciates the help." "He does, though he'd never admit it. Pride, as I said." Victor leaned back in his chair. "You strike me as a practical woman, Mrs. Harrow. You understand that sometimes a man's pride can be inconvenient, that those of us who care about his welfare need to make decisions he might resist, for his own good." Eliza met his eyes. "What kind of decisions?" Before Victor could answer, the door opened. Cole stood in the doorway, his expression going hard when he saw Victor at his table. "Victor, didn't expect you today." Victor stood smoothly. "Cole, I was just getting acquainted with your lovely wife. I came by to discuss the lumber order for next month. We should finalize the contract before prices go up for spring." Cole's jaw tightened. "We can talk in the barn." "Of course." Victor turned to Eliza with that practiced smile. "Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Harrow. It was a pleasure meeting you." The two men went outside. Through the window, Eliza watched them cross the yard to the barn. Victor's hand was on Cole's shoulder, his posture easy and familiar. Cole's back was rigid, his limp more pronounced than usual. They were in the barn for 20 minutes. When Victor emerged, he mounted his horse with a wave and rode off, leaving a trail of dust that hung in the still air. Cole remained in the barn. Eliza waited 10 minutes, then carried a cup of coffee out to him. She found him sitting on the hay bale again, his head in his hands. "I made fresh coffee," she said quietly. He looked up, and for a moment his guard was down. She saw exhaustion in his face, frustration, and something that looked almost like fear. Then the shutters came down again. "What did Victor want with you?" His voice was flat. "He was waiting for you. We talked while he drank coffee." "What did he say?" "That he handles the ranch business for you. The financial side." Eliza held out the cup. "Cole, those supply orders in the ledger. I told you to stay out of it." "Is he the one placing those orders?" Cole's hands clenched. "It's handled." "It doesn't look handled. It looks like someone's bleeding this ranch dry." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me." Eliza set the coffee down and crouched in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Because from where I'm standing, something is very wrong. Those orders make no sense. The money going out doesn't match what's coming in, and that man—" She gestured toward where Victor had ridden off. "That man talks like he owns this place." Cole's face went white with anger. "You've been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks. You think that gives you the right to question how I run my ranch? I think I have eyes and a brain, and both of them are telling me you're in trouble. Get out. His voice was low, shaking. Get out of this barn and mind your own business. You're here to cook and clean, nothing more. The ranch is mine, the decisions are mine, and if I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. Eliza stood slowly. I'm your wife, Cole. That makes it my business, whether you like it or not. You're my wife on paper, that's all. Don't mistake a practical arrangement for something it isn't. The words hit harder than she expected. Eliza turned and walked out, her spine straight, refusing to let him see how they'd landed. Behind her, she heard something crash, the coffee cup thrown against the wall. That night, Cole didn't come in for dinner. Eliza ate alone and then sat by the stove with the supply ledger open on her lap. She went through it page by page, writing down every suspicious entry, every impossible expense. The pattern was undeniable. For 2 years since Cole's accident, supplies had been ordered and paid for that never arrived or arrived in smaller quantities than invoiced. Repairs had been contracted that were never completed. Transport fees charged for cattle that should have brought more money. And Victor Hale's name appeared on almost every receipt. She was still working when she heard the barn door open, heard Cole's uneven footsteps cross the yard. The house door opened, and he stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the night. I'm not a fool, he said quietly. Eliza looked up. I know what you're thinking, that I'm too proud or too stupid to see what's happening, but I know. He came into the room, leaning heavily on his cane. I've known for months that something's wrong. The numbers don't add up. The supplies don't arrive the way they should. The cattle sales bring in less than they ought to. Then why haven't you stopped it? Cole sank into the chair across from her. In the lamplight, he looked exhausted, older than his years. Because I can't prove it. Every receipt is signed, every contract is legal. Victor's careful. He makes sure everything looks legitimate on paper, and if I accuse him without proof... He shook his head. Do you know what people would say? That the cripple's lost his mind along with his leg. That I can't handle my own affairs anymore. So you're just going to let him rob you? I've been trying to catch him, trying to find something concrete. But I can't travel to town easily anymore. Can't inspect every delivery, can't attend every meeting, and Victor knows it. He's been patient, bleeding me slow enough that I can't pinpoint exactly where the money's going. Eliza looked down at the ledger. How bad is it? Bad enough that I'll lose the ranch within a year if it continues. Bad enough that the bank's starting to ask questions. He met her eyes. That's why they married me off to you. Victor suggested it, said I needed help managing the household, that it would free me up to focus on the ranch work. But what he really wanted was someone here who wouldn't know enough to question anything, someone he could work around. He didn't count on you actually paying attention, Eliza said slowly. No. He assumed you'd be like everyone else in this town, willing to look away as long as it didn't directly affect you. Cole's expression was bitter. I didn't want you here. Not because I thought you'd be useless, but because I knew you'd be one more person to protect. One more thing Victor could use against me. I don't need protecting. Everyone needs protecting from men like Victor Hale. Cole stood, wincing as he put weight on his bad leg. But now that you know, you need to be careful. Victor's dangerous when he's threatened. And if he realizes you're paying attention to the books, that you're asking questions, he let the sentence hang. What will he do? I don't know. But I know he won't let anything stand in his way. This ranch is valuable land, and he's been working too long to take it to let you ruin his plans. Cole moved toward his room, then paused. Don't trust him, Eliza. Don't trust his smile or his smooth words. And don't ever meet with him alone. He closed his door, leaving her sitting in the lamplight with the ledger full of lies. Eliza sat for a long time, thinking. She thought about Victor's assessing eyes, his too familiar manner, the way he'd positioned himself as Cole's savior. She thought about the town that had been so eager to marry her off to a failing rancher, about Mr. Davies' careful words and quick departure. This wasn't just about Cole's pride or his injury. This was about a man being systematically destroyed by someone who'd learned to exploit his weakness. And the town, or at least part of it, was complicit. She closed the ledger and stood, moving to the window. Outside, the night was vast and dark, the stars sharp and cold above the valley. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was riding back to town, confident in his control, certain that Cole Harrow was too broken and too proud to fight back. He was wrong about the pride. Cole was proud, yes, but not foolishly so. He knew what was happening. He'd been fighting alone, trying to find proof while his ranch crumbled around him. But now he wasn't alone. Eliza didn't love this man, didn't even particularly like him yet, but she understood him in a way that surprised her. She understood what it meant to be dismissed, to be considered too insignificant to matter. She understood what it meant to survive on nothing but will and stubbornness. And she was done being dismissed. Tomorrow she would start gathering her own proof. Tomorrow she would begin to build the case that Cole couldn't build alone. Victor Hale thought he was dealing with a crippled rancher and his ignorant wife. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. In the darkness of his room, Cole lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For 2 years he'd carried this weight alone, watching his ranch die by inches while he tried desperately to find a way to stop it. He'd pushed away every offer of help, every suggestion of assistance, because accepting help meant admitting weakness. And weakness was what had put him in this position in the first place. But tonight, for the first time since the accident that had shattered his leg and his life, he'd told someone the truth. Not because he wanted to, but because she'd given him no choice. She'd looked at his books and seen what he'd been trying to hide. Not from her, but from himself. That it was too much. That he was losing. That pride alone couldn't save what he was about to lose. He thought about the way she'd crouched in front of him in the barn, forcing him to meet her eyes. The way she'd said, "I'm your wife. That makes it my business." He'd thrown cruel words at her, tried to drive her away like he drove everyone away. But she'd just looked at him with those steady eyes and refused to flinch. Maybe, he thought, that had been Victor's real mistake. Not underestimating Cole, but underestimating Eliza. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Cole closed his eyes and tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. But despite himself, he felt something shift in his chest, the smallest crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't alone in this fight, and that, he realized, might change everything. The morning came cold and gray, frost coating the windows in delicate patterns that looked like shattered glass. Eliza woke before dawn, her mind already turning over the problem that had kept her awake half the night. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, building up the fire and setting coffee to boil while her thoughts worked through possibilities like fingers through a knot. Cole appeared as the sky began to lighten, moving stiffly from his room. He didn't meet her eyes as he took his cup of coffee, but something had shifted between them. The silence was no longer hostile. It was waiting. "I need to go into town today," Eliza said, setting bread and butter on the table. "We're low on flour and salt. Some other things." Cole looked up sharply. "I'll send one of the hands." "You don't have any hands. You've been doing everything yourself." His jaw tightened. "Then I'll go." "The road's bad. It'll take you twice as long with—" She stopped herself, but they both knew what she'd been about to say. "With your leg." "I can manage." "I know you can, but I can go faster, and you need to check the north pasture fence. You said yesterday it was down in 2 places. Eliza kept her voice level, practical. "Let me do what I can do, so you can do what needs doing here." Cole stared into his coffee for a long moment. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather purse. "Get what's on the list. Don't talk to anyone you don't have to, and stay away from Victor if you see him." "I will." "Eliza." He waited until she looked at him. "I mean it. He's more dangerous than you think." She took the purse and the list he'd written in his angular hand. "I'll be careful." 2 hours later, she was driving the wagon down the rutted road toward Crestfall, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. The town appeared at the base of the hills, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud whenever it rained. Eliza had spent less than 2 months here before her hasty marriage, but she knew its rhythms, knew which stores to avoid, and which shopkeepers might grant her a moment of civility. She went to the general store first, a dim building that smelled of leather and lamp oil. The proprietor, a heavy-set man named Garrett, looked up from his accounts when she entered. "Mrs. Harrow." His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "What can I do for you?" "Flour, salt, coffee, a few other things." She handed him the list. Garrett scanned it and nodded. "Take about 10 minutes to gather it all. You can wait by the stove if you're cold." While he moved through the store, Pulling items from shelves and measuring quantities, Eliza let her eyes wander over the space. Other customers came and went, a rancher's wife who ignored her completely, a young man buying tobacco who tipped his hat politely. And there, tacked to the wall behind the counter, was a board covered in notices and advertisements. One caught her eye, a printed handbill advertising transport services. Hale and Associates, livestock transport, supply delivery, contract negotiation, fair prices, reliable service. "That'll be $6.40, Garrett said, setting the bundled supplies on the counter. Eliza counted out the money, then gestured toward the board. "That transport company, Hale and Associates. How long have they been operating?" Garrett's expression flickered just for a second. 2, 3 years maybe. "Why?" "Just curious. My husband uses them for some ranch business." "Most folks do around here. Victor runs a tight operation." Garrett's voice was carefully neutral, but Eliza heard something underneath it, something guarded. "Is he honest?" The question hung in the air between them. Garrett's eyes moved to the door, then back to her face. "I wouldn't know about that, Mrs. Harrow. I just sell goods." "But you hear things." "I hear lots of things. Most of them aren't my concern." He pushed the supplies toward her. "You need help loading these." Eliza recognized a closed door when she saw one. "No, thank you. I can manage." She carried the supplies to the wagon herself, loading them carefully into the bed. As she worked, she noticed a man watching her from across the street, older, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. When he saw her looking, he touched his hat brim and walked away. The encounter left her unsettled. She climbed onto the wagon seat and was about to drive off when someone called her name. "Mrs. Harrow! What a pleasant surprise!" Victor Hale stood on the boardwalk, perfectly dressed, despite the early hour, his smile bright and welcoming. Eliza's hands tightened on the reins. "Mr. Hale, doing the shopping yourself? I'm surprised Cole didn't come with you." He walked closer, his boots clicking on the wooden planks. "These roads can be treacherous for a woman alone." "I'm fine." "Of course you are. You strike me as quite capable." His eyes moved over the supplies in the wagon bed. "Stocking up for the winter, I see. Smart, though if you'd mentioned it to me, I could have arranged a delivery. No need for you to make the journey." "I don't mind the journey. Still, it's an unnecessary burden. Part of my arrangement with Cole is handling these details, so he, and now you, don't have to trouble yourselves." Victor leaned against the wagon, casual and familiar. "In fact, I was planning to visit the ranch tomorrow to discuss some contracts. Perhaps while I'm there, you and I could go over the household accounts together. I could show you how the supply system works, explain the arrangements I've made on Cole's behalf." Every instinct Eliza had screamed danger. "That's kind of you, but I'm sure Cole can explain anything I need to know." "Cole's a proud man. He doesn't always want to admit when he needs help." Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes had gone sharp. "Between you and me, Mrs. Harrow, I worry about him. The accident changed him, made him suspicious, defensive. Sometimes he sees problems where there aren't any, imagines slights that don't exist. It's sad to watch, really. He seems perfectly clear-minded to me." "Does he?" Victor straightened, adjusting his gloves. "Well, you're still getting to know him. Give it time. You'll see what I mean." He stepped back from the wagon. "I'll stop by tomorrow afternoon. We can have that conversation about the accounts. I think you'll find it enlightening." He walked away before she could refuse again, disappearing into the bank across the street. Eliza sat frozen, her heart pounding. The threat had been subtle, but unmistakable. Victor knew she'd been looking at the books, and he was coming to the ranch to make sure she understood her place. She drove out of town faster than she should have, the wagon rattling over the rough road. Her mind raced through what she'd learned. Victor's transport company was new, started right around the time of Cole's accident. The shopkeeper had been afraid to speak against him, and Victor himself had just made it clear that he considered her a problem that needed managing. She was so caught up in her thoughts that she almost missed the rider coming up fast behind her. She glanced back and saw a horse gaining on the wagon, not Victor's bay, but a rough-looking sorrel. The rider pulled alongside, and Eliza recognized him as the man who'd been watching her outside the general store. "Mrs. Harrow!" He had to shout over the noise of the wagon. "Pull over a minute!" Eliza's hand moved toward the rifle Cole kept under the seat. "Why?" "I got something to tell you, about Victor Hale, but I can't do it in town where people can see." She should keep driving. She should go straight back to the ranch and tell Cole, but something in the man's weathered face made her pull the horses to a stop. He dismounted and walked to the side of the wagon, keeping his hands visible. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 60, with the sun-beaten skin of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. Name's Walter Price. I used to work for your husband before his accident. I was his foreman for 10 years. Used to? Got let go about 6 months after Cole got hurt. Victor convinced him I was too old, that the ranch couldn't afford to pay me anymore. Walter's expression was bitter. It was a lie. Cole didn't want to fire me, but Victor had him convinced the money wasn't there. Made it seem like I was the problem. Eliza studied him. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw you asking questions in Garrett's store, saw Victor corner you afterward, and I figure maybe someone's finally starting to see what that snake is doing. Walter glanced back toward town. I worked that ranch for a decade. I know how much it brings in, what it costs to run it. When Cole got hurt, the numbers should have stayed about the same, but they didn't. They got worse. A lot worse. You think Victor's stealing from him? I don't think. I know. Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. I kept records of my own. Inventory counts, cattle tallies, supply deliveries I personally received. When I got fired, I took them with me. I've been trying to figure out how to get them to Cole, but Victor watches that ranch like a hawk. Can't get near the place without him knowing. He held out the paper. Eliza took it, unfolding it to reveal columns of numbers in a neat, careful hand. Even at a glance, she could see they didn't match the ledger back at the ranch. This shows what was actually delivered versus what was charged? She asked. Some of it, not everything. I couldn't track it all after I left, but enough to show a pattern, enough to prove Victor's been doctoring the books. Walter's voice dropped. Ma'am, your husband's a good man. Treated me fair for 10 years, never shorted my wages or worked me beyond what was reasonable. What Victor's doing to him, bleeding his ranch dry while he's too hurt to fight back, it's not right. And I figured maybe you could use this. Maybe you could help him in a way I can't. Eliza folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her coat. Does anyone else know about this? No one who'll speak up. Victor's got this town sewn up tight. He's on the bank board, friendly with the mayor, does business with half the merchants. People know something's off, but they're not going to risk their own livelihoods to help Cole Harrow. Walter remounted his horse. Watch yourself, Mrs. Harrow. Victor's smooth and he's smart, but he's mean when he's crossed. Don't let him catch you alone. He rode off before she could ask anything else, disappearing into the trees that lined the road. Eliza sat for a moment, the paper burning like fire in her pocket, then snapped the reins and drove for home. Cole was in the barn when she arrived, working leather with an awl and needle. He looked up as she entered, his expression wary. Any trouble? I ran into Victor. He's planning to visit tomorrow afternoon. Eliza pulled the paper from her pocket and held it out. And I met someone else. Walter Price. He said he used to work for you. Cole's face went still. He took the paper slowly, unfolding it. As he read, something changed in his expression. Hope and anger and grief, all mixed together. Where did you get this? His voice was rough. Walter gave it to me. He's been keeping his own records. He said Victor got him fired. Victor convinced me I couldn't afford to keep him on. Said the ranch was losing money and I needed to cut costs. Cole's hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. I believed him. I was barely managing to get around, could barely keep track of everything, and Victor had all these numbers showing how much we were in the red. I thought... He stopped, his jaw working. I thought Walter was just one more thing I couldn't hold on to. Cole. Eliza waited until he looked at her. Walter kept these records because he knew something was wrong. He's been trying to help you. And now we have proof. It's not enough. Cole set the paper down on the workbench. It's Walter's word against legal contracts and signed receipts. A fired foreman claiming the numbers are wrong versus a respected businessman with documentation. Who do you think people will believe? Then we get more proof. We find the actual supplies, the real delivery records, the how. Cole's voice rose, frustration spilling over. I can't travel easily. Can't sneak around town asking questions without Victor hearing about it. Can't inspect deliveries that happened months ago. And even if I could, who would I report it to? The sheriff who's friends with Victor, the bank that Victor sits on the board of. So we just give up? Let him take everything? I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Cole grabbed his cane and stood, pacing the small space. You don't understand how this works. In a town like Crestfall, connections matter more than truth. Victor's built himself up over 2 years, made himself indispensable, made everyone believe he's doing me a favor by handling my affairs. He stopped, facing her. And he was smart about it. He didn't steal everything at once, just a little here, a little there, enough that I felt the squeeze but couldn't prove where it was coming from. Eliza picked up Walter's paper. This proves it. This proves Walter thinks he saw something. It's not legal evidence. It's not testimony from the merchants who delivered the goods or the bank records showing where the money went. Cole's shoulders sagged. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this isn't a fight we can win. So what? You're just going to wait until he takes the ranch completely? I'm going to keep my head down and try to survive long enough to find a real way out. Maybe save enough to buy a smaller place somewhere else. Start over. Running away. Cole's eyes flashed. Surviving. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Eliza stepped closer to him. You spent 2 years fighting alone, trying to find proof while your ranch fell apart around you. But you're not alone anymore. And I'm not going to watch Victor Hale steal everything you've built just because the fight is hard. You've been here 3 weeks, Eliza. 3 weeks. You don't know this man, don't know what he's capable of. I know exactly what he's capable of. I know men like him, men who smile while they destroy you, who use your weakness against you, who count on you being too proud or too scared to fight back. Her voice shook with intensity. I've been powerless my whole life, Cole, pushed around by circumstance, by poverty, by men who thought they could dictate my choices. And I am done. I'm done being powerless. The words hung between them. Cole stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. What are you suggesting? He asked quietly. I'm suggesting we fight smart instead of alone. Walter gave us a piece of the puzzle. We find the other pieces. We build a case so strong that Victor can't talk his way out of it. And if we fail, if he catches on and comes after us, then at least we went down fighting instead of lying down and letting him win. Eliza held his gaze. I know you're scared, not of Victor, but of failing, of everyone seeing you fail. But hiding from that fear isn't the same as beating it. Cole looked away, his jaw tight. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do this. You don't have to do it alone. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind outside and the distant lowing of cattle. Finally, Cole nodded, just once. All right, we do this carefully. No rushing in, no confrontations until we have everything we need. Agreed. And if Victor comes tomorrow, you let me handle him. Don't give him any reason to think you're a threat. Eliza wanted to argue, but she recognized the fear underneath his words. He was trying to protect her the only way he knew how. I'll be careful. That night, they sat at the kitchen table with Walter's records, the ranch ledger, and sheets of paper where Eliza had been noting discrepancies. Cole explained the ranch operations to her, walking her through what expenses should look like versus what they showed in the books. His voice was steady, almost clinical, but she could hear the pain underneath when he pointed out places where Victor had bled him. Here, he said, tapping an entry. Cattle transport to the Denver market. Victor charged me $48. The going rate should be $30, maybe $35 for that size herd. Did you ever question it? I did once. He showed me invoices from the transport company, explained that rates had gone up because of railroad problems. It sounded reasonable. Cole's expression was bitter. What I didn't know was that Victor owns the transport company. He was charging me inflated rates and pocketing the difference. Eliza wrote it down. We need to prove he owns the company. The county clerk's office would have the registration papers. But how do we get access without Victor finding out? We'll figure it out. She moved to the next entry. What about this? Hay delivery, 20 tons, $60. That's actually close to right. Not everything's a scam. Victor's smart enough to keep some transactions legitimate, so the whole thing doesn't look suspicious. Cole leaned back in his chair, rubbing his bad leg absently. That's what makes this so hard to prove. It's not every transaction. Just enough of them, scattered through the books, that the pattern doesn't jump out unless you know what you're looking for. They worked until past midnight, building a list of suspicious transactions and what they'd need to verify each one. By the time they finished, Eliza's head ached and her eyes burned, but they had something resembling a plan. "I'll need to go back to town," she said. "Talk to the merchants, see if I can get copies of actual delivery receipts. They won't talk to you. Most of them are afraid of Victor. Then I'll find the ones who aren't afraid, or the ones who are tired of being afraid." Eliza gathered the papers into a neat stack. People talk, Cole. They gossip, they complain, they share stories. Someone knows something useful. I just have to find them. Cole studied her across the table, his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this? You could just exist here. Keep house, collect your room and board, stay out of it. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I married you, whether either of us wanted it or not." She met his eyes. "Besides, I told you, I'm done being powerless." Something passed between them then, an understanding, fragile but real. They were allies now, bound by more than just a marriage certificate, bound by shared purpose and shared risk. "Thank you," Cole said quietly. Eliza nodded and stood. "Get some rest. Victor's coming tomorrow, and we need to be ready." She went to her room and lay in the darkness, listening to Cole move around the house before finally retiring to his own room. Her mind wouldn't settle, turning over plans and possibilities. She thought about Victor's smooth voice, his veiled threats, the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. Let him come tomorrow. Let him think he had the upper hand. She would smile and nod and play the part of the ignorant ranch wife, and all the while she'd be watching, learning, gathering ammunition. Eliza had learned long ago that underestimation was a weapon. People dismissed what they thought was weak, overlooked what they believed was insignificant. Victor Hale had made the mistake of thinking she was both. He would learn differently. They both would. Across the house, Cole lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the way Eliza had looked at him when she'd said, "I'm not going to watch Victor Hale steal everything you've built." The fierce determination in her voice, the absolute refusal to back down. For 2 years, he'd carried this burden alone. Told himself it was because he had to, because accepting help meant admitting defeat. But the truth was simpler and harder. He'd been afraid. Afraid that if he let someone close enough to see how bad things really were, they'd confirm what he feared most. That he really was as broken as everyone thought. But Eliza hadn't looked at him like he was broken. She'd looked at him like he was someone worth fighting for. The realization unsettled him. He'd married her out of desperation, accepted the arrangement because he'd run out of options. He'd expected her to be a burden, one more weight on shoulders already buckling under too much. Instead, she'd become something he hadn't anticipated. An ally. A partner. Maybe, eventually, something more. The thought scared him almost as much as losing the ranch did. But as he finally drifted towards sleep, Cole allowed himself to hope, just a little, that maybe he didn't have to face this alone anymore. Morning came too quickly. Eliza rose and went through the familiar routine of building the fire, making coffee, preparing breakfast. Cole appeared looking haggard, as if he'd slept as poorly as she had. "He'll be here around 2, Cole said, pulling on his coat. "I'm going to check the fence line, make it look like normal work. When he arrives, bring him coffee, be polite, but don't offer anything else. And for the love of everything, don't argue with him. I know how to play a part." Cole paused at the door. "Eliza, I mean it. Victor's dangerous when he thinks he's being challenged. Keep your head down today. We'll have other chances." "I will. I promise." He nodded and left. Eliza spent the morning cleaning, baking bread, doing all the tasks that would make her look like exactly what Victor expected. A woman occupied with domestic duties, too busy with household concerns to think about ranch business. At 1:30, she heard hoofbeats in the yard. She smoothed her apron, checked her reflection in the small mirror by the door, and arranged her face into a neutral, pleasant expression. Victor knocked twice, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. "Mrs. Harrow, I hope I'm not interrupting." He swept in like he owned the place, removing his hat and gloves. "Is Cole around?" "He's checking fence line. He should be back soon." Eliza gestured to the table. "Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be lovely." She poured 2 cups and sat down across from him. Victor settled into the chair with easy familiarity, his eyes moving around the kitchen with proprietorial assessment. "You've done well with the place," he said. "It was quite neglected before. Cole's injury made it difficult for him to keep up with everything. He works very hard. Oh, I don't doubt it, but there's only so much one man can do, especially in his condition." Victor sipped his coffee. "That's why I'm so glad you're here now. Cole needs someone to handle the things he can't manage anymore." The words were kind, but Eliza heard the condescension underneath. "He seems to manage fine." "Does he?" Victor's smile was indulgent. "Mrs. Harrow, I don't mean to speak ill of your husband, but surely you've noticed the state of this ranch. The repairs that haven't been done, the fence line that's always breaking, the cattle that keep getting lost. These are signs of a man who's in over his head. I think they're signs of a man who's been dealing with challenges. Challenges he created for himself by refusing help when it was offered." Victor set down his cup. "I've been trying for 2 years to convince Cole to let me take over more of the day-to-day operations, bring in proper management, hire competent staff, modernize the way things are run. But his pride won't allow it, and so the ranch continues to deteriorate." Eliza forced herself to stay calm, to keep her expression neutral. "I'm sure Cole has his reasons. His reasons are stubbornness and denial, but perhaps you can help with that." Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping into a confidential tone. "Between you and me, I think Cole's injury affected more than just his leg. He's not thinking clearly, making poor decisions, seeing conspiracies where there are only honest business arrangements. I worry about him, Mrs. Harrow. I worry what will happen if someone doesn't step in and help him face reality." "What reality is that?" "That he can't run this ranch anymore. That the kindest thing would be to let it go, sell to someone who can actually manage it properly, and use the proceeds to start fresh somewhere less demanding." Victor's eyes were sharp despite his sympathetic tone. "I have buyers interested. Good people who'd pay fair value and give Cole enough to live comfortably, but he refuses to even consider it." Eliza's hands tightened around her cup. So that was the endgame. Bleed the ranch dry, convince everyone Cole was incompetent, then swoop in with buyers who were probably Victor's own associates. Take the land for pennies on the dollar and leave Cole with nothing. "Have you mentioned this to Cole?" she asked carefully. "Many times. He won't listen. But perhaps if the suggestion came from you, his wife, someone he trusts, he might be more receptive." Victor reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "I'm asking you to help me help him, Mrs. Harrow, for his own good." The touch made her skin crawl, but she didn't pull away. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." He withdrew his hand and stood. "Now, about those household accounts I mentioned, why don't you show me what you've been working with, and I can explain how the system works?" Eliza's mind raced. She couldn't refuse without making him suspicious, but she couldn't show him the real ledger with all her notes and questions in the margins. "Actually, Cole has the main ledger with him. He was reviewing some entries this morning." Victor's expression flickered. Was he? How industrious? And what was he reviewing? "Supply orders, I think. Nothing specific." "I see." Victor moved toward the door, his posture suddenly less relaxed. "Well, when he returns, tell him I need to speak with him about next month's contracts. It's time sensitive." He paused, turning back to her. "And Mrs. Harrow, I hope you'll give serious thought to what I said about helping Cole see reason. You strike me as a practical woman. I'm sure you understand that sometimes we have to make hard choices for the people we care about." He left, mounting his horse and riding off without waiting for Cole to return. Eliza stood at the window, watching until he disappeared down the road, her heart pounding. He knew. Maybe not everything, but he knew they were looking at the books more closely. And his response wasn't to confront Cole directly. It was to try to turn her against him, to make her an ally in his scheme. When Cole returned an hour later, she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. "He's moving faster than I expected," Cole said when she finished. "The talk about buyers, about me being incompetent, that's his exit strategy. He's been positioning me as a failure so that when he finally makes his move, everyone will think he's doing me a favor. We have to move faster too then. How? We still don't have proof that would stand up in any legal proceeding." Eliza thought for a moment. "Walter said Victor's on the bank board. If he is, there will be meeting minutes, records of votes, maybe correspondence, public records that might show his involvement in other questionable dealings. The bank won't just let you walk in and read their board minutes. No, but they have to keep them on file, and government records are supposed to be accessible to the public. She turned to face him. I could request them formally, as a citizen concerned about business practices in town. That would tell Victor exactly what you're looking for. Maybe. Or maybe it would look like a new wife trying to understand her husband's business affairs, learning about the local economy, the business community her husband is part of. Eliza's mind was working through the possibilities. If I approach it right, it might seem innocent. And even if Victor hears about it, what can he do? Object to someone exercising their legal right to review public documents? Cole paced the kitchen, his cane tapping against the floor. It's risky. Everything we do from here on out is risky. He stopped, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're not going to back down, are you? No. Even though I'm telling you it's dangerous, even though Victor made it clear today that he's watching you. Especially because of that. Eliza crossed her arms. He threatened me today, Cole. Politely, with a smile, but it was a threat. And I'll be damned if I let a man like that make me afraid. Something changed in Cole's face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. All right, we do this your way, but carefully, and you don't go anywhere alone. Agreed. They spent the evening planning her approach to the county offices, working out exactly what she'd request and how she'd frame it. By the time they finished, exhaustion was pulling at both of them. Get some sleep, Cole said, standing with effort. Tomorrow, we start really fighting back. Eliza nodded and went to her room, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Victor's hand on hers, the veiled threats in his smooth words, the way he'd looked at Cole's home like it was already his. She thought about the ledger full of lies, about Walter Price fired for being inconvenient, about a town full of people who knew something was wrong but chose silence over risk. And she thought about Cole's question. Why are you doing this? The answer was more complicated than she'd admitted. Yes, she was tired of being powerless. Yes, she hated injustice and refused to watch a man be destroyed just because he'd been injured. But there was something else, too. Something that had crept up on her in the quiet moments when she watched Cole push himself through pain to complete a task, when she saw the pride he fought to maintain despite everything trying to crush it. She was starting to care about him, not love, not yet, maybe not ever, but care, respect, the beginning of something that felt like partnership. And that, she realized, made this fight even more important. Because it wasn't just about saving a ranch anymore. It was about proving that two people who'd been discarded and dismissed could stand together and refuse to be beaten. Tomorrow, they would take the next step. And whatever came after, victory or defeat, success or ruin, they would face it side by side. In his room, Cole lay awake with similar thoughts running through his mind. For the first time in 2 years, the future didn't look quite so hopeless. He still didn't know if they could win, still didn't know if gathering proof would be enough to stop Victor. But he wasn't alone anymore, and that changed everything. The county offices occupied the second floor of a narrow building on Main Street, accessed by a steep staircase that creaked with every step. Eliza climbed it on a Tuesday morning, her hands steady despite the nervous energy coiling in her stomach. Cole had wanted to come with her, but they'd agreed it would look more natural if she came alone, a wife seeking to understand her husband's business affairs while he worked the ranch. The clerk behind the desk was a thin woman with gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She looked up from her papers with the expression of someone perpetually interrupted. Help you? I'd like to request access to county business records, Eliza said, keeping her voice pleasant but firm. Specifically, corporate registrations and bank board meeting minutes. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an unusual request. What's your purpose? Educational. I'm new to the area and want to understand the local business landscape better. My husband is a rancher, and I'd like to learn about the companies he does business with. Your name? Eliza Harrow. Something flickered in the woman's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or wariness. Mrs. Harrow. Yes, I heard Cole had married. She pulled out a ledger and opened it. Business registrations are public record. I can get you those files. Bank board minutes are trickier. They're technically public, but the bank has to approve requests for copies. Who do I ask for approval? The board secretary. That would be Mr. Victor Hale. Of course it would be. Eliza kept her expression neutral. Is there no way to access them without going through him? The clerk studied her for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. The minutes are filed with the county after each meeting. They're supposed to be available for review upon request, but most people don't know that. If you wanted to come back Thursday afternoon when I'm here alone, I could let you review them in the reading room. You couldn't take them with you, but you could take notes. It was a risk, this woman offering help when she didn't have to. Eliza wondered what Victor had done to earn her quiet rebellion. Thank you. I'll be here Thursday at 2. Come to the side entrance, less visible from the street. The clerk pulled out several thick folders. These are the business registrations from the past 5 years. You can review them at that table there. I'll need them back before you leave. Eliza spent the next 2 hours going through documents, her hand moving steadily across the paper as she took notes. Victor's name appeared more often than she'd expected. Hale and Associates Transport, registered 3 years ago. Mountain Valley Supply Company, registered 2 years ago. Crestfall Livestock Exchange, registered 18 months ago. All corporations that did business with ranchers throughout the county, all registered to Victor Hale or his close associates. The pattern was damning. Victor hadn't just created one company to overcharge coal. He'd built an entire network of businesses designed to extract money from every part of the ranching operation: transport, supplies, livestock sales. A rancher couldn't operate without using at least one of his companies, and many used all three without realizing they were all controlled by the same man. She was copying the last address when the door opened and boots sounded on the wooden floor. Eliza didn't look up immediately, but every nerve in her body went taut. "Mrs. Harrow, what a surprise to find you here!" Victor's voice was pleasant, curious, with an edge underneath that made her pulse quicken. She looked up, arranging her face into an expression of polite surprise. "Mr. Hale, I was just doing some research." "So I see." He moved closer, his eyes dropping to the papers spread across the table. "Business registrations. How industrious. May I ask what you're researching?" "Just trying to understand the local economy better. As Cole's wife, I thought I should educate myself about the companies he works with." "How thoughtful." Victor pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "Find anything interesting?" Every instinct screamed at her to gather the papers and leave, but that would show fear. Instead, she smiled. "It's fascinating how interconnected everything is. So many businesses serving the ranching community. It's a small county. We all do our part to keep the economy running." His eyes moved over her notes, and she saw the moment he registered what she'd been copying. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his gaze. "I see you've been quite thorough. Multiple business entities, registration dates, ownership structures. That's rather detailed for simple educational purposes." "I like to be thorough." "So do I." Victor leaned back in his chair, his posture casual, but his attention fixed on her like a predator watching prey. "Mrs. Harrow, I'm going to be direct with you. This interest in business records, combined with Cole's recent scrutiny of the ranch accounts, suggests a certain suspicion. I find that troubling." "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. I think you've convinced yourself that there's something improper in my business dealings with your husband. That somehow I'm taking advantage of his situation." Victor's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "It's a natural conclusion for someone who doesn't understand how ranch operations work. The expenses seem high, the returns seem low, and you're looking for someone to blame." Eliza met his eyes. "I'm not looking for anyone to blame. I'm just trying to understand the numbers. The numbers are complicated. That's why Cole hired me to handle them, because running a ranch requires expertise he simply doesn't have anymore." Victor stood, moving around the table until he was standing directly beside her chair. "Let me share something with you, Mrs. Harrow. Something I haven't told Cole because I didn't want to hurt his pride further. The ranch is failing not because of my management, but despite it. Cole's injury left him unable to do the work properly. Cattle get lost because he can't ride the range effectively. Repairs go undone because he can't manage the physical labor. Orders get confused because he's in constant pain and can't focus. I've been holding things together as best I can, but there's only so much I can do when the owner himself is the problem." "That's not true, isn't it? You've lived with him for what, a month now? You've seen how he struggles, how he pushes himself past the point of reason and then makes mistakes because he's exhausted, how his pride won't let him admit he needs real help." Victor's hand rested on the back of her chair. I'm trying to save that ranch, Mrs. Harrow. Trying to keep it solvent long enough for Cole to accept reality and sell to someone who can actually run it. But if you keep filling his head with paranoid fantasies about corruption and theft, you're going to destroy the only chance he has of walking away with anything. The lies were smooth, practiced, designed to sound reasonable. If Eliza hadn't spent weeks watching Cole work himself to exhaustion while managing complicated repairs with meticulous precision, she might have believed them, but she knew better. Thank you for your concern, she said, gathering her papers. But I think Cole and I can manage our own affairs. Victor's hand shot out and gripped her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her movement. I don't think you understand the position you're in. Cole owes a great deal of money, to the bank, to suppliers, to contractors. If questions are raised about my management, if accusations are made that can't be proven, those creditors might decide to call in their debts immediately. The ranch would be foreclosed within a month. Is that what you want? Let go of me. I'm trying to help you. Help both of you. But he didn't release her wrist. Drop this foolish investigation. Stop asking questions and looking at records. Let me continue managing the ranch, and when the time is right, I'll find buyers who'll pay enough that Cole can start over somewhere else. Fight me, and you'll both end up with nothing. Worse than nothing, debts that will follow you for years. Eliza looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up at his face. If you don't let go of me right now, I'm going to scream loud enough that everyone on Main Street will come running, and then I'm going to tell them exactly what you just threatened me with. Victor's smile didn't waver, but he released her wrist. I haven't threatened you, Mrs. Harrow. I've simply explained the economic realities of your situation. If you choose to interpret business advice as a threat, that says more about your state of mind than my intentions. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. I'll be visiting the ranch again on Friday. I suggest you and Cole use the time between now and then to think very carefully about your next steps, because once you cross certain lines, there's no going back. The door closed behind him. Eliza sat frozen for a moment, her wrist still tingling where he'd gripped it. Then she carefully folded her notes and slipped them into her bag. The clerk appeared from the back room, her face pale. I heard everything. He's got no right to threaten you like that. But he did it in a way that leaves no proof. Eliza's hands were shaking now, the fear she'd suppressed during the confrontation flooding through her. If I report it, it's my word against his. I'll testify to what I heard. And lose your job? Maybe worse? Eliza shook her head. No, but thank you. And thank you for the offer about Thursday. I'll be here. She left through the side entrance, keeping to the less traveled streets, as she walked back to where she'd left the wagon. Her mind raced through what had just happened. Victor knew they were investigating, knew they were gathering evidence, and he just made it clear he wouldn't hesitate to destroy them if they pushed further. The smart thing would be to back off. Take his advice, stop asking questions, accept the inevitable loss of the ranch, and hope he kept his word about finding buyers. It was the safe choice, the survivable choice. But Eliza had spent her whole life making the safe choice, and where had it gotten her? Pushed from one bad situation to another, always at the mercy of circumstances she couldn't control. For once in her life, she had the chance to fight back, to stand up to a man who thought he could intimidate her into submission. She wasn't going to waste it. Cole was in the barn when she returned, working on a saddle that needed new stirrup leathers. He looked up as she entered, and his expression shifted immediately when he saw her face. What happened? She told him everything, watching his expression darken with each word. When she got to the part about Victor grabbing her wrist, Cole's hands clenched so hard the leather in his grip tore. He put his hands on you. His voice was low, dangerous. I handled it. He threatened you, threatened us both. Cole threw down the ruined leather and stood. That's it. I'm going to town, and I'm putting a stop to this right now. And do what? Confront him? He'll deny everything. Make you look unstable, paranoid, violent. That's exactly what he wants, for you to lose control and give him ammunition to use against you. I don't care. He can't. Cole's voice cracked. He can't threaten my wife and think he'll get away with it. The words hung in the air between them. My wife. Not you. Not someone under my roof. My wife. The possessiveness in his tone surprised them both. Eliza stepped closer to him. He's scared, Cole. That's why he confronted me today. He knows we're getting close to something he doesn't want us to find. If we back down now, we prove he can intimidate us into submission, But if we keep going, he'll make good on his threats. Call in the debts, foreclose on the ranch, destroy us. Maybe. Or maybe we find what we need before he can act. She pulled out her notes. I found something today. Victor doesn't just own the transport company, he owns the supply company too. And the livestock exchange. Every business you deal with, he controls them all. That's not just theft, Cole. That's monopoly, price fixing, fraud on a massive scale. Cole took the notes, scanning them quickly. If this is true, it is. I saw the registration documents myself. He's been building this network for years, using it to control the entire local ranching economy. Eliza's voice gained strength as she spoke. This isn't just about your ranch anymore. It's about every rancher in the county who's been forced to use his services. If we can prove what he's doing, if we can show the pattern, it's still our word against his. Documents showing he owns companies isn't proof he's using them fraudulently. Not by itself, but combined with Walter's records, with the discrepancies in your ledger, with testimony from other ranchers who've been overcharged. She trailed off, thinking, we need to find other victims, people he's done the same thing to. They won't talk. Victor's made sure everyone's too scared or too compromised to speak against him. Then we find the ones who have nothing left to lose, the ones he's already destroyed. Eliza paced the barn, her mind working through possibilities. When you lost Walter, where did he go? Is he still in the area? He's got a small place about 15 miles east. Why? Because he's not the only person Victor's gotten rid of. There must be others, workers, competitors, ranchers who lost their land, people who know what he's capable of and might be willing to testify if they thought it could actually stop him. Cole stared at her, something like awe creeping into his expression. You're talking about building a case big enough that he can't talk his way out of it. Evidence from multiple sources, multiple victims, all pointing to the same pattern of fraud. Yes, that's going to take time, and Victor's watching us now. He'll see what we're doing. Let him watch. As long as we don't give him legal grounds to act against us, there's nothing he can do but wait and worry. Eliza moved closer to Cole. You said yourself he's been bleeding the ranch slow. That means he needs more time, too. Time for the debts to pile up enough that foreclosure looks justified. Time to position himself as the savior with his buyer friends. We use that time to build our case. Cole looked down at the notes in his hands, then back at her face. This is dangerous, more dangerous than either of us realized. I know. Victor won't just threaten next time, he'll act, and he's got the whole town's power structure behind him. I know that too. Then why? Cole's voice broke. Why are you willing to risk so much for this? For me? You could walk away right now. File for an annulment, claim the marriage was coerced. Start over somewhere else. Eliza thought about how to answer that. About all the reasons she'd been telling herself. Justice, pride, refusal to be powerless. But standing there in the dimness of the barn, looking at the raw vulnerability in Cole's face, she realized the truth was simpler. Because nobody else is going to fight for you, she said quietly, and you deserve someone who will. The words settled between them, honest and stark. Cole reached out slowly, as if afraid she might pull away, and took her hand. Not grabbing like Victor had, but gentle, asking permission. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip careful despite the strength she could feel in it. I don't deserve you, he said. You don't get to decide that. They stood like that for a moment, hands linked, the air between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Cole released her hand and straightened his shoulders. All right, we do this your way. We build the case, find the other victims, gather evidence until it's undeniable. His jaw set with determination. But we do it smart. No more going into town alone. No more putting yourself in positions where Victor can corner you. Agreed. And you don't go anywhere alone either. He might try to provoke you into a confrontation, make you look unstable. I can control myself. I know you can, but let's not give him the opportunity. Eliza picked up her bag. Thursday afternoon, I'm going back to the county offices to review the bank board minutes. The clerk's going to let me in through the side entrance when no one's watching. I need you to be nearby, maybe at the general store across the street, close enough to help if something goes wrong. Cole nodded. What are you looking for in the minutes? Votes, decisions, conflicts of interest. Victor sits on the bank board, which means he has influence over lending decisions. If he's been steering loans toward his own companies or blocking credit to competitors, it'll show up in the meeting records. That's ambitious. That's necessary. She moved toward the door, then paused. Cole? When he grabbed my wrist today, I wasn't afraid. I was angry. And that anger, it's powerful. It makes me want to fight instead of run. I just wanted you to know that. Cole's expression was unreadable. I'm glad you weren't afraid, but I was. When you told me what he did, he stopped, shaking his head. I've been afraid for 2 years. Afraid of losing the ranch, afraid of proving everyone right about me being broken, afraid of ending up with nothing. But today, when I thought about him hurting you, I realized there are worse things than losing everything I own. He didn't elaborate, and Eliza didn't push. But as she walked back to the house, she felt the weight of those words settle over her like a blanket. Something was shifting between them, changing from a practical arrangement into something more complicated and more real. Thursday came wrapped in cold rain that turned the roads to mud and made the wagon wheels stick with every rotation. Cole drove while Eliza sat beside him, both of them silent with tension. They reached town just after 1 o'clock, the streets nearly empty in the downpour. Cole pulled the wagon up outside the general store. I'll be right here. You see Victor? You leave immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to finish what you're doing. Just get out. I will. Promise me, Eliza. She looked at his face, saw the fear barely contained beneath his stoic expression, and felt something twist in her chest. I promise. The county office building looked different in the rain, darker and more forbidding. Eliza slipped in through the side entrance as instructed, water dripping from her coat. The clerk was waiting. Mrs. Harrow, come quickly. The reading room's this way. The room was small and windowless, lit by a single lamp. Stacks of bound minutes covered the table. 3 years' worth of monthly bank board meetings. The clerk set down paper and pencils. You have 2 hours. After that, I have to lock up. And Mrs. Harrow? She hesitated at the door. Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it. Victor Hale cost my brother his farm 2 years ago. Used some legal trick with the loan terms that I never understood, but the end result was foreclosure and my brother working someone else's land for wages. So if you're going after him, you have my support. Just be careful. Thank you, I will. The clerk left, closing the door softly. Eliza opened the first volume and began to read. Bank board minutes were dry, bureaucratic, filled with financial terminology and procedural language. But patterns emerged as she worked through them. Victor had joined the board 3 years ago, shortly after his transport company was established. Within 6 months, he'd proposed a new lending program specifically for ranchers needing to modernize their operations. Generous terms, low interest rates, designed to help struggling operations get back on their feet. At least, that's what the language said. But as Eliza read further, she saw the reality. Ranchers who took these loans were required to use specific contractors and suppliers for their improvements, contractors and suppliers that turned out to be Victor's companies. The loans were structured so that the improvement costs exceeded the loan amounts, forcing ranchers to take on additional debt. And when they couldn't keep up with payments, the board, led by Victor, would restructure the loans with penalty terms that made the debt balloon. It was elegant and vicious. Victor had turned the bank itself into a tool for funneling ranchers into his network of companies, then used their mounting debt to force them into foreclosure when they couldn't pay his inflated prices. Eliza's hand cramped as she copied down vote tallies, loan approvals, policy changes. She noted which board members consistently voted with Victor and which sometimes dissented. She documented the timeline of when companies were registered versus when loan programs were created to feed business to those companies. She was deep into the second year of minutes when the door opened. Eliza's head snapped up, her heart hammering. But it was just the clerk, her face pale with urgency. You need to leave, now. Victor just walked into the bank across the street. I don't know if he's coming here, but you can't risk it. Eliza gathered her notes with shaking hands, shoving them into her bag. Is there another way out? Backstairs, through the storage room. Come on. They hurried through a dusty room filled with filing cabinets and boxes, down a narrow staircase that creaked alarmingly. The clerk opened a door onto a back alley that ran behind the buildings. Go left. It'll take you around to the general store. And Mrs. Harrow, be safe. Eliza ran through the rain-slicked alley, her boots splashing through puddles, her bag clutched tight against her chest. She emerged onto the street 2 buildings down from the general store and walked quickly toward where Cole waited. He saw her coming and climbed down from the wagon immediately, his expression tight with concern. "Did you get it?" "Most of it. The clerk warned me Victor showed up, so I had to leave early." She climbed onto the wagon seat. "But what I found, Cole, it's worse than we thought. The bank itself is part of his scheme. He's been using it to trap ranchers into debt so they're forced to use his companies." Cole snapped the reins and the horses moved forward, pulling the wagon through the muddy street. Neither of them spoke until they were well outside of town, the rain still falling in sheets around them. "How many ranchers?" Cole finally asked. "At least a dozen in the loan records I reviewed, probably more in the years before he joined the board." Eliza pulled out her notes, protected from the rain by her coat. "It's systematic, Cole. A pattern repeated over and over. And some of those foreclosed properties, I recognized the names from the business registrations. He's been buying up the land through shell companies, building an empire on the backs of people he's destroyed." Cole's voice was hard as stone. "We have to stop him." "We will. But we need more. More victims willing to testify, more documentation, more evidence of the pattern." She looked at him. "Can you make a list of the ranchers you know who've lost their land in the past 3 years? People who might talk to us. Most of them have left the county. The ones who stayed are working for other ranchers trying to rebuild. They're not going to want to dredge up what happened. They might if they knew they weren't alone, if they knew there were others that were building a case strong enough to actually take Victor down." Eliza's jaw set. "We need to try, Cole. Find them, talk to them, show them they have a chance at justice." Cole was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses carefully through the muddy road. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You're not going to let this go, are you? No matter how dangerous it gets, no matter what Victor threatens, you're going to keep fighting." "Yes." "Why? And don't tell me it's about being powerless or hating injustice. Tell me the real reason." Eliza looked at his profile, at the hard line of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders, at the man who'd been fighting alone for 2 years, who'd pushed everyone away because accepting help meant admitting weakness, the man who'd married her out of desperation and somehow become someone she couldn't walk away from. "Because you matter," she said simply. "This ranch matters. And I'm tired of watching good people get destroyed by men who think power gives them the right to take whatever they want." Cole's hands tightened on the reins. "When this is over, if we win, things are going to change between us. You understand that?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, this arrangement we made, this practical marriage of convenience, it's not going to stay that way. Not after everything we've been through together." He finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm not good at this. Feelings, caring about people, letting them close. I've spent 2 years building walls because it was easier than letting anyone see how broken I felt. But you walked right through those walls like they were made of paper. And now I don't know how to go back to pretending I don't care what happens to you." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Eliza felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the weight of what he was offering her. Not love, not yet, maybe, but the possibility of it, the beginning of something real. "Good," she said quietly, "because I don't want you to go back. I want you to keep being honest with me, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Cole nodded, turning his attention back to the road, but his hand found hers on the seat between them, lacing their fingers together. They drove the rest of the way in silence, hands linked, the rain falling around them like a curtain separating them from the rest of the world. That night, after dinner, they sat at the kitchen table with all their evidence spread before them. Walter's records, Eliza's notes from the county offices, the ranch ledger with its damning discrepancies, lists of other ranchers who might have been victims, timelines of when Victor's companies were registered and when his influence at the bank began. "Tomorrow I'll ride out to talk to Walter," Cole said. "See if he knows who else might be willing to testify. And I'll check with some of the older ranchers, ones who've been around long enough to see the pattern. I'll organize what we have so far," Eliza said. "Create a clear timeline, document every transaction that doesn't add up. We need it to be undeniable." Cole looked at her across the table, his expression serious. "Victor's coming here tomorrow, Friday," he said. "We need to be ready for that." "What do you think he'll do?" "Try to intimidate us again. Maybe make another offer to help us by selling the ranch, or Cole's jaw tightened. Or he might try to force the issue. Find some pretext to call in the debts early, start foreclosure proceedings before we can build our case. Can he do that legally? If he controls the bank board, he can probably find a way to justify it. Some clause in the loan agreement, some technicality I didn't notice when I signed. Cole ran his hand through his hair. We're running out of time, Eliza. Even if we gather all the evidence in the world, it won't matter if he forecloses before we can use it. Eliza thought for a moment, an idea forming. Then maybe we need to change our approach. Stop reacting to his moves and make some of our own. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we let him know we're not backing down. Not through confrontation, but through action. We start talking to other ranchers openly, making it clear we're investigating his business practices. We request more public records, ask more questions. Force him to respond to us instead of us always responding to him. That's going to make him escalate. Probably. But it's also going to make him nervous. Right now he thinks he's in control, that he can manage us with threats and manipulation. If we show him we're not afraid. She met Cole's eyes. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent worry about their own position. Cole studied her, and she saw respect in his gaze. You're a lot tougher than I gave you credit for. So are you. You've been fighting this battle for 2 years. I'm just helping you finish it. They worked late into the night, preparing for Victor's visit, organizing their evidence, planning their next moves. When they finally stopped, exhaustion pulling at them both, Cole walked Eliza to her bedroom door. Thank you, he said, for all of this, for not giving up when any sane person would have walked away. Maybe I'm not sane. Maybe. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Or maybe you're exactly what I needed, even if I was too stubborn to see it. He started to turn away, but Eliza caught his hand. Cole? Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Victor threatens or offers, we face it together. Agreed? Agreed. She watched him limp to his own room, saw the careful way he moved, the pain he tried to hide. And for the first time, she let herself think about what she'd been pushing away for weeks. She cared about this man, cared about his pride and his pain, his stubbornness and his strength, cared enough that the thought of losing him, to Victor's schemes or foreclosure or anything else, made her chest ache. Tomorrow Victor would come, and they would face him together. And whatever happened after that, whatever battles still lay ahead, Eliza knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done running from fights she believed in, done accepting defeat because it was easier than standing up. Victor Hale had picked the wrong woman to threaten. And he was about to learn exactly what that meant. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and bitter cold, the kind that made the ground ring like iron under boot heels. Eliza woke before dawn, her stomach tight with anticipation. Today Victor would come, and everything they'd built toward would either hold or crumble. She found Cole already in the kitchen, coffee made, his expression set with the same grim determination she felt. He'd shaved carefully, dressed in his best shirt, the one without patches or frayed cuffs, making himself presentable for battle. "How's the leg?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. "It'll hold." He flexed it unconsciously. "I've been working on something, exercises, stretches, trying to build the strength back." Eliza looked at him sharply. She'd noticed him spending more time in the barn lately, heard occasional sounds of movement and exertion through the walls. "You didn't mention that." "Didn't seem worth mentioning if it didn't work." Cole's jaw tightened. "But I'm tired of being weak, tired of using this leg as an excuse for everything I can't do. So I've been pushing it, seeing what's still possible." "Does it hurt?" "Like fire most days, but it's getting stronger. Not what it was, but better than it's been." He met her eyes. "I can't face Victor today leaning on a cane like a broken man. I need to stand on my own feet." The pride in his voice was painful to hear, but Eliza understood it. Today wasn't just about defending the ranch. It was about proving to himself and to Victor that he wasn't the helpless cripple everyone believed him to be. "Then that's what you'll do," she said simply. They spent the morning preparing. Eliza baked bread and set the house in order, making everything look normal and domestic. Cole worked in the barn, but she noticed he moved with more purpose than usual, testing his weight on the bad leg, forcing himself to walk without the cane. The pain showed in the whiteness around his mouth, but his steps were steadier than she'd seen in weeks. At 1 o'clock they heard hoofbeats in the yard, but it wasn't Victor who rode up. It was Walter Price, his weathered face anxious. "Mrs. Harrow, Cole." He dismounted quickly. "I came to warn you. Victor's been asking questions around town about who I've been talking to. He knows I gave you those records." Cole came out of the barn, walking carefully but upright, no cane in sight. "What kind of questions?" "The threatening kind, suggesting I might have fabricated those numbers out of spite over being fired, hinting that making false accusations could get a man in serious legal trouble." Walter's expression was grim. "He's building a defense before you even make an accusation. Getting ahead of it." "That means he's scared," Eliza said. "He wouldn't bother unless he thought we were a real threat. Maybe. But it also means he's prepared. Whatever you're planning to do, he's expecting it." Walter pulled an envelope from his coat. "I brought something else. Letters from 3 other ranchers who've been squeezed by Victor's companies. They won't testify publicly, too afraid of retaliation, but they've written down what happened to them. Dates, amounts, contracts that didn't make sense. It's not much, but it's something." Cole took the envelope, his expression unreadable. "Why would they trust you with this?" "Because I asked. Because I told them someone was finally fighting back. And even if they couldn't stand up themselves, they could help from the shadows." Walter's voice roughened. "These are good men, Cole. Men who worked their whole lives building something, only to watch it get stolen piece by piece. They want justice, even if they're too scared to pursue it themselves." "Thank you." Cole's voice was thick with emotion. "For this, for everything. I'm sorry I ever believed Victor when he said I couldn't afford to keep you on. You were in an impossible position. I don't hold it against you." Walter glanced toward the road. "But you should know, Victor's not coming alone today. I saw him in town this morning with Sheriff Daniels. They were having quite the friendly conversation." The news hit like cold water. The sheriff was Victor's ally, which meant any confrontation today could end with legal consequences stacked against them. "Then we'll be careful," Eliza said, though her heart raced. "Thank you for the warning, Walter, and for the letters. They might make all the difference." After Walter left, Cole and Eliza returned to the kitchen and read through the letters. The stories were achingly similar to Cole's own, contracts that seemed fair until you looked closely, invoices that didn't match deliveries, transport fees that tripled without explanation. A pattern of exploitation so consistent it couldn't be accidental. "This is good," Cole said, setting down the last letter. "Combined with everything else we have, it shows Victor's been running the same scheme across the county. But Walter's right. Without these men willing to testify publicly, it's still just paper. Victor will claim they're lying, that it's all sour grapes from failed ranchers looking for someone to blame. Then we use it differently. Not as direct testimony, but as corroboration. Evidence that supports what we can prove with the business records and bank documents." Eliza's mind was working through the strategy. We don't need them to testify if we can show the pattern is undeniable. Same methods, same companies, same results across multiple operations. Cole was about to respond when they heard it. Multiple horses this time, coming up the road at a deliberate pace. They moved to the window and watched as Victor rode into the yard, accompanied by Sheriff Daniels and another man Eliza didn't recognize, dressed in a city suit with a leather satchel. "That's Marcus Webb," Cole said, his voice tight. "Lawyer from Denver. If Victor brought him, this isn't a social call." They watched the 3 men dismount and approach the house. Victor knocked firmly, then opened the door without waiting for permission. "Cole, Mrs. Harrow, I hope we're not interrupting." Victor's smile was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. "I've brought some people I think you should meet. You know Sheriff Daniels, of course, and this is Marcus Webb, legal counsel for several business interests in the county." The sheriff nodded, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. The lawyer said nothing, just studied them both with the cold assessment of a man paid to find weaknesses. "What can we do for you, Victor?" Cole's voice was steady, and Eliza felt pride swell in her chest at how straight he stood, how level his gaze remained. "Actually, we're here to do something for you, to help you avoid a very unfortunate situation." Victor gestured to the table. "May we sit? This will take a few minutes to explain properly." Cole and Eliza exchanged glances. They could refuse, but that would only escalate things. Better to hear what Victor had planned and respond accordingly. "Of course," Cole said, his tone offering nothing. They all sat, the kitchen suddenly crowded with tension. The lawyer opened his satchel and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Harrow," Webb began, his voice professionally neutral, "I've been reviewing your financial situation on behalf of my clients, the bank, several supply companies, and transport contractors you do business with. I'm afraid the picture is quite concerning. Your current debt load stands at approximately $18,000, with monthly obligations you've been struggling to meet for the past 6 months. I'm current on all my payments," Cole said. "Barely. And several contracts contain acceleration clauses that allow creditors to demand full payment if your financial condition deteriorates to the point where default seems likely." Webb slid a document across the table. "This is a notice of intent to accelerate. Your creditors have determined that your operation is no longer financially viable and are prepared to call in your debts within 30 days unless alternative arrangements are made." Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. This was it, Victor's move to force them out before they could build their case. "That's convenient timing," she said, her voice sharp. "Just when we've been asking questions about business practices in town, suddenly all these creditors decide Cole's a bad risk." Webb's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Harrow, I understand you're upset, but the timing is coincidental. These creditors have been patient for months, hoping Mr. Harrow's situation would improve. It hasn't. In fact, it's gotten worse. The ranch is producing less, expenses remain high, and there's no reasonable expectation of recovery given Mr. Harrow's physical limitations." "My physical limitations haven't changed in 2 years," Cole said, his voice like gravel. "Why is it suddenly a problem now?" "Because your wife's recent activities have raised concerns." Victor leaned forward, his tone reasonable and concerned. "Requesting business records, asking questions about corporate structures, making accusations about fraud and corruption. These actions suggest you're preparing litigation rather than focusing on improving your operation. That makes creditors nervous, Cole. It makes them think you're planning to dodge your obligations by creating legal complications. Or maybe it makes them nervous because they know what we'll find if we keep looking," Eliza shot back. Sheriff Daniels spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "Mrs. Harrow, I'd advise you to be careful about making accusations you can't prove. Slander is a serious matter, and interfering with legitimate business dealings could constitute fraud on your part." The threat was unmistakable. They weren't just coming after the ranch, they were threatening Eliza personally. Cole's hand found hers under the table, gripping tightly. "What do you want, Victor?" "I want to help you, same as I've been trying to help you for 2 years. Victor's expression was earnest, almost pained. "I have buyers lined up who'll pay fair market value for this ranch. You'd walk away with enough to clear your debts and have money left over to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere the work isn't so demanding, where you can find something suited to your current capabilities. And these buyers just happen to be friends of yours?" "Associates, yes, but that doesn't change the fact that they're offering you a way out of an impossible situation." Victor's voice hardened slightly. "The alternative is foreclosure, Cole. Having the sheriff escort you off your own land while everything you own gets sold at auction for pennies on the dollar. Is that really what you want? Is that really what you want for your wife?" The words hung in the air, heavy with threat and false concern. Eliza felt Cole's hand trembling in hers, felt the weight of 2 years of struggle pressing down on him. This was the moment Victor had been engineering, the moment where pride and hope collided with harsh reality, where fighting seemed futile and surrender seemed like the only rational choice. But something had changed in the past weeks. Cole wasn't alone anymore. And Eliza wasn't the powerless woman who'd been married off to solve other people's problems. "No," Cole said quietly. Victor's eyebrows rose. "No. No, I'm not selling. Not to your associates, not to anyone." Cole's voice gained strength. "This is my land, my ranch, built with my sweat and blood over 15 years, and I'm not handing it over to you or anyone else." "Cole, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. You're the one who's been unreasonable. You and your companies and your carefully structured schemes to bleed me dry." Cole stood, and Eliza saw him force his weight fully onto the bad leg, saw him refuse to waver despite the pain. "I know what you've been doing, Victor. The inflated prices, the phantom deliveries, the transport fees that don't match actual costs. I know about your network of companies, all designed to funnel money out of ranchers' pockets into yours. And I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Webb cleared his throat. Mr. Harrow, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof to support them? We're working on it, Eliza said, standing beside Cole. And we'll have it soon. Business records, testimony from other victims, documentation of the pattern of fraud. Everything we need to show exactly what Mr. Hale has been doing. Victor's expression finally cracked, annoyance flashing through. You're making a mistake, both of you. These paranoid fantasies about fraud and conspiracy, they're going to destroy what little credibility you have left. People already think you're unstable, Cole, that the accident damaged more than just your leg. This crusade you're on is only going to confirm their worst suspicions. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. The truth is you're a broken-down rancher with debts you can't pay and a wife who's filled your head with nonsense. Victor stood as well, his smooth mask completely gone now. You want to fight this? Fine. I'll call in every debt you owe. I'll make sure the bank forecloses, the suppliers sue, the contractors put liens on everything you own. And when you're standing in the mud watching your life get auctioned off, you remember that I offered you a way out, and you were too proud and too stupid to take it. Get out of my house, Cole said, his voice quiet but absolute. With pleasure. Victor grabbed his hat and moved toward the door, Webb and the sheriff following. At the threshold, he turned back. You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, the legal proceedings begin and there's no stopping them. Think about that, Cole. Think about what you're throwing away because you can't accept reality. The door slammed behind them. Through the window, Eliza and Cole watched the three men mount their horses and ride off, their retreat leaving a wake of dust and threat. Cole's leg buckled the moment they were out of sight. Eliza caught him, helping him into a chair as his face went white with pain. I overdid it, he gasped. Standing like that, putting full weight on it. You were magnificent. Eliza's hands were shaking as she helped him extend the leg, saw how swollen it had become. But you need to rest it now. Let me get cold water. No. Cole gripped her wrist. No time for that. We have 1 week, Eliza. 1 week before Victor makes good on those threats. We need to finish building our case now. You can't even stand. Then I'll work sitting down. His jaw set stubbornly. Help me to the table. We need to go through everything we have, organize it, figure out what's still missing. If we're going to fight this, we need ammunition, and we need it fast. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to make him rest, but she saw the determination in his eyes and knew it was pointless. Instead, she helped him settle at the table and brought all their documents, the ledgers, Walter's records, the letters from other ranchers, her notes from the county offices. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, organizing everything into a coherent narrative. The pattern became clearer with each document they reviewed. Victor had spent 3 years building his network of companies, using his position on the bank board to funnel business to himself, exploiting injured or struggling ranchers who were too vulnerable to fight back. The amounts weren't massive for each individual transaction. A few dollars here, a markup there, but accumulated across dozens of operations and hundreds of transactions, it added up to systematic theft on a grand scale. We need someone official to take this to, Cole said as darkness fell outside. Someone who can actually investigate and bring charges. But everyone in this county is either afraid of Victor or in his pocket. Then we go outside the county. State authorities. Maybe federal if we can make the case for mail fraud or interstate commerce violations. Eliza's mind raced through possibilities. But we need it to be airtight before we approach anyone. One chance to make our case, and if it's not strong enough, Victor walks away and we lose everything. What about the newspaper? Public exposure might force authorities to act even if they don't want to. Victor probably has influence there too. And if we go public without solid proof, he'll sue us for libel and destroy what little credibility we have. Eliza rubbed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. We need something concrete. Something he can't deny or explain away. A smoking gun that proves fraud beyond any doubt. Cole was quiet for a moment, staring at the papers spread across the table. Then his expression changed, something clicking into place. The contracts, he said slowly. The actual contracts I signed versus the invoices I received. If they don't match, if Victor's companies charged more than the agreed-upon rates or delivered less than contracted, that's breach of contract. That's not just my word against his. That's documentary proof. Do you still have the original contracts? Most of them. They're in the desk in my room. Cole started to stand, winced, and sat back down. Can you get them? Bottom drawer, left side, there's a wooden box. Eliza found the box and brought it back. Inside were dozens of contracts, some yellowed with age, others more recent. They began matching them against the invoices in the ledger. The discrepancies jumped out immediately. A transport contract for $30 showed an invoice for $48. A supply agreement for specific quantities showed deliveries that were consistently short. Repair work contracted at one rate was billed at nearly double. This is it, Eliza breathed. This is proof. Signed contracts that Victor's companies violated repeatedly. He can't claim these are legitimate business dealings when his own contracts prove otherwise. Unless he claims the contracts were modified verbally, that I agreed to the changes and just forgot. Cole's voice was bitter. He'll say my injury made me confused, that I approved everything and now I'm trying to get out of pain. Can he prove verbal modifications? Can I prove there weren't any? Cole shook his head. It'll be his word against mine, and we're back where we started. Eliza stared at the contracts, frustration building. They were so close. They had evidence of the pattern, documentation of fraud, testimony from other victims. But Victor had been careful enough that he could always claim misunderstanding, always deflect blame, always hide behind plausible explanations. Then a thought struck her. What if we catch him in the act? Cole looked up. What do you mean? Victor's coming back, right? He'll want an answer about selling, or he'll want to move forward with foreclosure proceedings. What if when he comes we get him to incriminate himself? Get him to admit what he's been doing in a way we can prove? How? He's not going to just confess. No, but he might brag. If he thinks he's won, if he believes we're defeated and desperate, he might gloat. Tell us exactly how clever he's been, how he's outsmarted everyone. Eliza's pulse quickened. People like Victor, they want you to know how much smarter they are. They can't resist the opportunity to explain their brilliance once they think there's no threat. And we'd need to record it somehow, get it down on paper, or have a witness he doesn't know about, someone hidden who can testify to what they heard. Eliza's mind raced. Walter, he could be in the barn, close enough to hear through the window if we conduct the conversation in the kitchen. Between his testimony and whatever we can get Victor to say, we might have enough. Cole studied her, something like awe in his expression. You're talking about setting a trap, provoking him into revealing himself. I'm talking about giving him enough rope to hang himself with. Eliza met his eyes. It's risky. If he suspects anything, if he keeps his guard up, we get nothing and we've wasted our chance. But if we can pull it off, we have him. Cole leaned back in his chair, thinking. We'd need to play it perfectly. Make him believe we're ready to give up, that we're just looking for some dignity and surrender. Appeal to his ego. Can you do that? Pretend to be defeated when you're not? A hard smile crossed Cole's face. I've had 2 years of practice pretending I'm not dying inside. I think I can manage a few more minutes. They spent the next hour planning exactly how the confrontation would go, what they'd say to draw Victor out, how they'd position themselves so Walter could hear everything from the barn. It was risky and relied on Victor behaving predictably, but it was the best chance they had. By the time they finished, it was late, and both of them were exhausted. Cole tried to stand and his leg nearly gave out again. This time Eliza didn't ask permission. She wrapped his arm over her shoulders and helped him to his room. I can manage, he protested, but there was no strength behind it. I know you can, but you don't have to. She helped him sit on the bed, then knelt and carefully examined his leg. The swelling had gone down somewhat, but the muscle was tense and knotted. Let me help. Eliza, please. She looked up at him. I've watched you push yourself to the breaking point every day for weeks. I've seen you hide the pain, force yourself to work when you can barely stand. And I understand why. I understand that independence matters to you, that asking for help feels like admitting defeat. But Cole, you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. His defenses crumbled. She saw it happen, saw the walls he'd built around himself crack and fall away. I don't know how to let someone help me. Then learn, starting now. Her hands moved gently over the damaged muscle, feeling for the knots and tension. Tell me where it hurts most. Here. He guided her hand to his calf. And here, up along the thigh. The doctor said the bones healed wrong, that the muscles compensated and created new problems. What did he recommend? Surgery to re-break and reset the bones, but I can't afford it, and even if I could, I'd be laid up for months. The ranch would be lost before I could walk again. Cole's voice was rough with frustration, so I just pushed through it, work around the limitations as best I can. Eliza's hands worked carefully, applying gentle pressure to the knotted muscles. She'd learned this years ago, caring for an elderly woman who'd taken her in briefly. The woman had suffered from joint pain and had taught Eliza how to ease it with careful manipulation. There might be another way, she said softly. Not surgery, but therapy. Exercises to strengthen the weak muscles, stretches to improve flexibility. It wouldn't fix the underlying damage, but it might reduce the pain and improve function. I've tried exercises. They don't help. You tried them alone, pushing too hard, probably making things worse. She applied pressure to a particularly tight spot, and Cole hissed through his teeth. What if you tried them with guidance? With someone who could tell you when you're doing too much, help you build strength gradually instead of all at once? Cole was quiet for a moment, his breathing uneven from pain and something else. Hope, maybe, or fear of hoping. You're talking about you, helping me. Yes. Why would you do that? Because I want to. Because you matter to me. Because... She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Cole's hand covered hers, stilling her movement. Because... Eliza looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with everything they'd been too careful to say out loud. Because when this is over, she said quietly, I don't want to lose you. This ranch, this fight, it's important. But you're what matters to me. And I want you strong and healthy and whole, not just for the battle, but for whatever comes after. The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Cole's hand tightened on hers. Eliza, His voice broke. I'm not good at this. At caring about someone, at letting them care about me. I've spent so long building walls, keeping everyone at distance, that I don't know how to... Then we learned together. She shifted, sitting beside him on the bed, their hands still linked. We learn how to trust each other, how to be partners instead of just allies. We figure it out as we go. Cole pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. I don't deserve you. Stop deciding what you deserve. Just accept what I'm offering. He kissed her then, gentle and hesitant, like someone afraid the moment might shatter. Eliza kissed him back, her free hand coming up to cup his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw and the warmth of his skin. It wasn't desperate or passionate. It was something quieter and more profound. A promise, a beginning, a choice they were both making. When they finally pulled apart, Cole's eyes were bright with emotion. Whatever happens next week, whatever Victor throws at us, we face it together, Eliza finished. And we don't give up. Not on the ranch, not on this fight, and not on each other. Cole nodded, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I'll start the exercises tomorrow. Let you show me how to do this right. But Eliza, you have to promise me something. What? If this goes wrong, if Victor wins and we lose everything, you get out. You don't go down with me. You take whatever you can and you start over somewhere safe. No. Eliza, no, Cole. I'm not making that promise because I'm not going to need it. We're going to win this. We're going to take everything we've built and we're going to expose Victor for exactly what he is. And then we're going to rebuild this ranch together, make it everything it should have been all along. Her voice was fierce with conviction. So stop planning for defeat and start believing we can actually pull this off. A slow smile spread across his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Yes, ma'am. She stood, helping him stretch out on the bed. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we start preparing for Victor's return. And we start the therapy work on your leg. We have 1 week to get ready, and we're going to use every minute of it. As she moved toward the door, Cole called her name. She turned back. Thank you, he said softly, for everything. For fighting for me when I'd given up fighting for myself. For seeing something in me worth saving. Always, Eliza said. Now get some sleep. We have work to do. She went to her own room and lay in the darkness, her mind too active for sleep. They'd drawn their line in the sand today, refused Victor's offer, committed themselves to the fight. There was no backing down now, no safe retreat if things went wrong. But for the first time since arriving at this ranch, Eliza felt something other than grim determination. She felt hope. Real, tangible hope that they could actually win this, that justice might triumph over corruption, that two people who'd been discarded and dismissed might prove everyone wrong. Tomorrow they'd start preparing for the final confrontation. They'd set their trap, gather their evidence, make ready for the battle that would decide everything. It would be dangerous and difficult, and there were no guarantees, but they would face it together. And that, Eliza was beginning to understand, made all the difference. In his room, Cole lay awake as well, his hand still tingling from where Eliza had held it, his lips still warm from her kiss. For 2 years, he'd told himself he was better off alone, that caring about someone just gave them power to hurt you. He'd built his isolation carefully, brick by brick, convincing himself it was strength when it was really just fear. But Eliza had demolished those walls without even trying. She'd walked into his life as a stranger, bound by necessity, and somehow become the thing he couldn't imagine losing. The person who made him want to fight, not just for his ranch, but for the future they might build together. Tomorrow he'd let her help him with the exercises, let her see his weakness and pain without hiding behind pride. It would be hard. Everything about vulnerability was hard for him. But she was right. They were partners now, and partners didn't face battles alone. Victor thought he'd won today, thought he'd cornered them with his threats and his lawyers and his one-week ultimatum. But Victor didn't understand what he was really facing. Not a broken rancher and his desperate wife, but two people who'd found something worth fighting for. Each other, their future, the truth. And that was a force Victor Hale had never calculated into his careful schemes. The week that followed was the hardest and most transformative of Cole's life. Each morning, before the sun broke over the hills, Eliza would come to his room and guide him through exercises that left him sweating and shaking with effort. She was patient, but relentless, pushing him just to the edge of what he could endure, and then holding him there until his muscles learned new patterns of strength. Again, she'd say when he wanted to stop, 5 more. You can do 5 more. And somehow, he could. The leg that had been nothing but dead weight and pain for 2 years began to respond. Not healed. It would never be truly healed, but stronger, more capable. The limp remained, but it grew less pronounced each day. The cane stayed propped in the corner, unused. They worked on the evidence too, refining their case, organizing every document into an irrefutable narrative. Walter visited twice more, bringing additional testimony from ranchers who'd finally found the courage to speak up. The pattern was undeniable now. Years of systematic fraud, documented across dozens of transactions and multiple victims. On the 5th day, Eliza made the trip to town alone despite Cole's protests. She returned with a stranger, a rail-thin man in his 50s with ink-stained fingers and sharp, intelligent eyes. "This is James Morrison," she announced. "He's a reporter for the territorial newspaper in Denver. I wrote to him 3 days ago about Victor's operations. He came all this way to hear our story." Cole stared at her. "You contacted a newspaper without telling me?" "I told you we needed to go outside the county for help. Mr. Morrison has been investigating corruption in frontier banking for 2 years. When I described what we'd found, he caught the first train west." Eliza's eyes were bright with triumph. "He wants to see everything we have." Morrison spent 2 days at the ranch going through their evidence with meticulous care. He asked pointed questions, cross-referenced documents, took extensive notes. His expression remained neutral throughout, giving nothing away. Finally, on the 7th day, the day Victor's ultimatum expired, Morrison set down his pencil and looked at them both. "This is the most comprehensive documentation of organized fraud I've seen in a decade of reporting," he said quietly. "If even half of this holds up under scrutiny, Victor Hale and his associates are looking at criminal charges, civil suits, and financial ruin. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next." "What do you mean?" Cole asked. "I mean that once I publish this story, there's no going back. Hale will come after you with everything he has: lawsuits, criminal complaints, social ostracism. He'll try to destroy your credibility, paint you as vindictive liars motivated by jealousy or mental instability. It'll get ugly, and it'll get public." Morrison's gaze was steady. "Are you ready for that fight?" Cole looked at Eliza. She took his hand and squeezed. "We're ready," they said together. Morrison nodded. "Then I'll file the story tomorrow. It'll run in 3 days, front page. But there's something else you should know. I sent preliminary findings to a federal marshal I know, one who specializes in financial crimes. If your evidence is as solid as it appears, there may be federal charges. Wire fraud, mail fraud, possibly racketeering. Hale's empire might not just crumble, it might land him in prison. The words settled over them like snow, cold and absolute. This was bigger than saving the ranch now. This was about justice on a scale they'd barely imagined. There's one more thing, Eliza said. Victor's coming here today. He said 1 week, and today's the deadline. We're planning to, She explained their trap, the idea of getting Victor to incriminate himself with Walter as a witness. Morson's eyes lit up. Let me be the witness instead. A reporter's testimony carries more weight than a fired ranch hand's, no offense to Mr. Price. And if I can get direct quotes from Hale admitting to fraud, it makes the story unassailable. Cole and Eliza exchanged glances. It was riskier with Morrison. If Victor recognized him, the whole plan would collapse. But Morrison was right about the weight his testimony would carry. All right, Cole agreed. But you stay completely hidden. If he sees you, we lose everything. They prepared carefully. Morrison positioned himself in the barn loft with a clear view of the kitchen window, notebook ready. Cole and Eliza rehearsed their approach one final time, running through the script they'd developed to draw Victor out. At precisely 2 o'clock, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. But this time Victor arrived alone, his expression confident as he dismounted and approached the house. Cole opened the door before Victor could knock. He stood straight and steady, no cane in sight, and Eliza saw Victor's eyes flicker with surprise at his improved posture. Victor, come in. Cole? Mrs. Harrow. Victor removed his hat and stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the kitchen. I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me. I hope this week has given you time to reconsider my offer. It has, Cole said, and Eliza heard the carefully controlled defeat in his voice. Sit down. We should talk. Victor settled into the chair with the satisfied air of a man who'd already won. Eliza poured coffee with trembling hands, real nervousness mixed with theatrical performance, and set cups before them. I've been thinking about what you said, Cole began, his voice heavy. About being practical, about accepting reality, and I think, he paused, as if the words were difficult. I think maybe you were right. Interest sparked in Victor's eyes. Go on. The ranch is failing. I can't manage it the way I used to, and the debts keep piling up. I've been fighting so hard to hold on to it that I couldn't see I was just making things worse. Cole's hand tightened around his cup. Eliza made me realize that sometimes pride is the enemy of wisdom, that knowing when to let go is its own kind of strength. Victor leaned back, barely containing his triumph. That's very mature of you, Cole. I know how difficult this must be. It is, but I need to understand something before we move forward. Cole met Victor's eyes. How did it get this bad? 2 years ago, the ranch was profitable. I had money in the bank, regular buyers for my cattle, reliable suppliers. Then I got hurt, and everything fell apart. I've been trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Sometimes misfortune snowballs, Victor said smoothly. Your injury meant you couldn't work as effectively. Productivity dropped, costs increased, and the spiral began. It's tragic, but it happens. Is that really all it was? Eliza asked, playing her part. Because I've been looking at the books, trying to understand, and some of the numbers don't make sense to me. The expenses seem so high compared to what we actually receive. Victor's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Ranch economics are complicated, Mrs. Harrow. Without proper business training, it's easy to misunderstand how costs accumulate. Explain it to me then, Cole said. Help me understand how I went from profitable to drowning in debt in just 2 years. What changed? The market changed. Transport costs increased. Supply prices went up. Your productivity decreased. Victor's tone was patient, condescending. These factors combined to create an untenable situation. But your companies control the transport, the supplies, the livestock sales, Eliza pressed. Doesn't that mean you controlled all those costs that supposedly increased? Victor's jaw tightened. I provide services at competitive rates. If you're implying something improper, I'm not implying anything, Cole interrupted. I'm asking for honesty. Between us, Victor. No lawyers, no witnesses, just you and me. How much of my failure was bad luck, and how much was you making sure I failed? The question hung in the air. Victor studied them both, and Eliza could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that made her skin crawl. You want honesty? Fine, I'll give you honesty. He leaned forward. You were doomed the moment you got hurt, Cole. Not because of the injury itself, but because you became vulnerable. Easy to manipulate, easy to exploit. A proud man too stubborn to ask for real help, but desperate enough to accept mine. So you did overcharge me. Cole's voice was carefully controlled. I charged what the market would bear, which in your case was quite a bit more than standard rates. Victor's confidence was growing, fed by what he thought was their defeated acceptance. The beauty of it was how simple it made things. You needed transport? I provided it. At premium rates. You needed supplies? My companies delivered them, for a nice markup. Your cattle needed selling? My exchange handled it, with generous commissions, of course. How generous? Eliza asked softly. 30, sometimes 40% above normal rates. You were in no position to shop around, and even if you tried, my competitors knew better than to undercut me. I control too much of the local economy for anyone to risk crossing me. Victor's expression was almost amused. You kept asking why the numbers didn't add up, Cole. Well, now you know. They didn't add up because I made sure they wouldn't. Every transaction was designed to bleed you just enough that you'd keep struggling, but not enough that you'd realize you were being bled. Cole's hands clenched, but he kept his voice level. And the bank loans? The restructured debt? That was the elegant part. I pushed you into those loans, told you they'd help you modernize and recover. Then I made sure the contractors you hired, my contractors, charged enough that the loans weren't sufficient. So you'd have to borrow more, at worse terms, creating a debt spiral you couldn't escape. Victor shook his head, almost admiringly at his own cleverness. You should have sold a year ago, Cole. You could have walked away with something. Now you're so deep in debt that my buyers are offering half what the ranch is actually worth, and you're desperate enough to take it. Your buyers, Cole repeated. Who are they really, Victor? Shell corporations I control. Once you sell, I'll own this land outright. Combined with the other properties I've acquired the same way, I'll have one of the largest holdings in the county, all built on the backs of proud fools like you who couldn't admit when they were beaten. Victor stood, adjusting his coat. But I'm not without mercy. I'll let you keep $5,000 from the sale. Enough to start over somewhere else. Maybe find work that doesn't require two good legs. Consider it a kindness. A kindness, Eliza said, her voice shaking. Not with fear now, but with rage. You destroy a man's life, steal his land, ruin his future, and call it kindness. I call it business, Mrs. Harrow. Don't take it personally. Your husband was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong limitations. If it makes you feel better, he's not the only one. I've run the same play a dozen times across this county, and it works beautifully every time. Victor moved toward the door. Now, I need your answer. Are you selling, or do I proceed with foreclosure? Neither, Cole said quietly. Victor turned back, irritation flickering across his face. Excuse me? I said neither. I'm not selling to your shell corporations, and you're not foreclosing on my ranch. Cole stood, and Eliza saw him put his full weight on both legs, saw him stand straighter and stronger than he had in 2 years. Because everything you just said, every word of your confession, was heard by a witness, and now you're finished. Victor's expression went from irritation to confusion to dawning horror as Morrison stepped out from the barn, notebook in hand, his face grim with purpose. James Morrison, Territorial Newspaper, Morrison said. I've documented everything you just admitted to, Mr. Hale. Fraud, price fixing, conspiracy, theft through deception, and I'll be publishing it all in 3 days, along with 2 years' worth of evidence from Mr. and Mrs. Harrow and testimony from a dozen other ranchers you've victimized. The color drained from Victor's face. You set me up. This whole conversation was a trap. It was, Cole agreed. And you walked right into it because you couldn't resist gloating. Couldn't resist explaining how clever you'd been, how thoroughly you'd beaten me. Your pride destroyed you, Victor, just like you tried to destroy me with mine. Victor's shock turned to fury. You think this changes anything? You think one reporter's word against mine will matter? I own this county, the bank, the sheriff, half the businesses in town. I'll bury this story. discredit you both, and make sure Morrison never works again. You can try, Morrison said calmly, but I've already sent copies of everything to my editor in Denver, to federal marshals, and to 3 other newspapers. Even if you somehow silence me, the story's already out there. And the evidence doesn't lie, Mr. Hale. Signed contracts, doctored invoices, bank records showing your company's monopoly, testimony from multiple victims. You can't talk your way out of documented fraud. Victor looked between them, his mind visibly racing for an escape, a countermove, anything to regain control. But there was nothing. The trap was complete, the evidence undeniable, the witnesses credible. "You've ruined me," he said, his voice hollow. "No," Eliza said quietly. "You ruined yourself. We just made sure everyone would finally see it." Victor's expression twisted with rage and desperation. For a moment, Eliza thought he might attack them physically, but Morrison stepped forward and the moment passed. Victor straightened his coat with shaking hands. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat was empty and they all knew it. "Actually, it is," Cole replied. "Get off my land, Victor, and don't come back." Victor left without another word, mounting his horse with the jerky movements of a man whose world had just collapsed. They watched him ride away, his confident posture gone, his shoulders hunched with defeat. When the dust settled, Morrison turned to them with a slight smile. "That was extraordinary. He incriminated himself more thoroughly than I dared hope. His own words will destroy him." "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "Now I write the story and it runs in 3 days. By this time next week, every newspaper in the territory will have picked it up. Victor Hale's name will be synonymous with fraud and corruption. The federal marshals will investigate, and based on what I heard today, criminal charges are virtually certain." Morrison tucked his notebook into his coat. "You should also know several of the other ranchers I spoke with are talking about filing civil suits to recover their losses. Between criminal charges and civil liability, Hale's financial empire will crumble completely." Cole sank into a chair, the enormity of what they'd just accomplished washing over him. "We actually did it. We beat him." "You did more than beat him," Morrison said. "You exposed a cancer that's been growing in this county for years. You're going to be heroes to every rancher who's been victimized, every family that lost their land, every person who knew something was wrong but was too afraid to speak up. You changed everything." After Morrison left to ride back to Denver, Cole and Eliza stood together in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in gold. "I can't believe it's over," Eliza said softly. "It's not over yet. The story still has to run. The investigation has to happen. The legal proceedings will take months." But Cole was smiling, genuine relief and joy breaking through his usual stoic mask. "But the fight, the real fight, that's over. We won." Eliza turned to him. "We won because we fought together. Because you trusted me enough to let me help, and I cared enough to refuse to give up on you." Cole pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a strength and confidence that had been absent weeks ago. "I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life, but I'm grateful every day that you did." "You didn't have to deserve it. You just had to accept it." She looked up at him. "What happens now? After the dust settles and Victor's dealt with and the ranch is truly ours again, now we rebuild. Not just the ranch, but everything. We hire back Walter and any other good people who got pushed out. We repair the buildings, restore the herds, make this place what it should have been all along." Cole's hand came up to cup her face. "And we build a life together, a real one, not just a practical arrangement. If you want that. If you're willing to stay with a stubborn, broken-down rancher who's still learning how to let someone love him." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "You're not broken. You're strong and brave and more whole than you give yourself credit for. And yes, I want to stay. I want to build that life with you." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring everything he'd been too afraid to say into the touch. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "The leg exercises," Cole said suddenly. "I want to keep doing them. Not because I need to prove anything, but because I want to be as strong as I can be, for me and for us. Then we'll keep doing them, every morning, together." Eliza smiled. "We're partners now, Cole, in everything." The story ran 3 days later, exactly as Morrison promised. Front page of the Denver Territorial newspaper, headline screaming, "Systematic fraud exposed. Banker's empire built on rancher exploitation." The article laid out everything: Victor's network of companies, the inflated charges, the bank board manipulation, the testimony from multiple victims. Morrison had included direct quotes from Victor's confession, his own words damning him beyond any doubt. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Other newspapers picked up the story within days. Federal marshals arrived in Crestfall to begin their investigation. The bank board voted to remove Victor and freeze his accounts pending the outcome of the criminal inquiry. Ranchers from across the county came forward with their own stories of victimization, adding to the mountain of evidence. Victor tried to fight back. He hired expensive lawyers, claimed he'd been entrapped, insisted the charges were exaggerated by vindictive competitors. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his own recorded confession was irrefutable. Within 2 weeks, he was arrested on federal fraud charges. The trial was set for 3 months later. The civil suits followed. Dozens of ranchers filed claims against Victor and his companies, seeking to recover their losses. The legal proceedings would take years to fully resolve, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Victor's empire was collapsing, and he would spend years, perhaps decades, paying for what he'd done. For Cole and Eliza, life at the ranch transformed. With Victor's schemes exposed, the legitimate creditors agreed to restructure Cole's debt based on actual fair market rates, rather than Victor's inflated charges. The burden was suddenly manageable. Walter returned as foreman, bringing with him 2 younger men he vouched for. Repairs began in earnest. The cattle herds were expanded with livestock purchased at honest prices from honest dealers. The physical transformation of the ranch was matched by Cole's personal transformation. The daily exercises with Eliza continued, and slowly but steadily, his strength improved. The limp would always be there. Some damage couldn't be fully repaired, but the constant pain diminished. He walked with more confidence, worked with less limitation, lived with less fear. More importantly, the emotional walls he'd built came down. He learned to accept help without seeing it as weakness, learned to share his struggles instead of hiding them, learned to believe that being vulnerable with someone you trusted wasn't defeat, but courage. 6 months after Victor's arrest, on a clear autumn morning when the aspens had turned gold and the air tasted of coming winter, Cole and Eliza stood together on the porch of their ranch house. The buildings had been repaired and painted, the fences were strong and straight, cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that had been restored to health. The ranch looked the way it had before the accident, productive, prosperous, full of possibility. "I got a letter from Morrison yesterday," Cole said, his arm around Eliza's waist. "Victor's trial is starting next week. Morrison's testifying, along with 14 ranchers who were victimized. The federal prosecutor says conviction is certain on at least 8 counts of fraud." "Good," Eliza said simply. "He deserves to face justice for what he did." Morrison also said we're being called heroes, that other counties are investigating their own banking boards and business practices because of what we exposed. We started something bigger than just saving our ranch. Eliza leaned into him. "We started by refusing to accept defeat. Everything else followed from that one choice." Cole turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Eliza Harrow, 6 months ago I married you out of desperation. I saw you as a solution to a problem, a practical arrangement that would buy me time. I never imagined—" His voice caught. "I never imagined you'd become the most important thing in my life, the person I can't imagine existing without." "Cole, let me finish." He squeezed her hands. "I know we're already married, legally bound by that cold ceremony in the courthouse. But that's not enough anymore. I want to marry you again, properly this time, with words that matter and promises that come from the heart. I want to stand in front of everyone we know and tell them that you're my wife, not because circumstances forced us together, but because I choose you. Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married again 2 weeks later in the ranch house surrounded by friends they'd made and allies they'd gathered. Walter stood as Cole's witness, and the county clerk, the one who'd helped Eliza access the records, stood as Eliza's. The words they spoke this time were nothing like the perfunctory vows from their first ceremony. They were honest and heartfelt, promises about partnership and trust and facing whatever came together. When Cole kissed his bride, really kissed her, holding nothing back. The small gathering erupted in applause. And when they pulled apart, both of them laughing and crying at once, Eliza saw something in Cole's eyes that had been absent from their first wedding day. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The celebration that followed was simple but warm. Food and music and stories shared among people who'd learned what it meant to stand together against corruption. Morrison had made the trip from Denver to attend, and he pulled Cole aside late in the evening. I wanted you to know, the story about your case won an award from the Territorial Journalism Association, Best Investigative Reporting of the Year, and I've had 3 publishers contact me about turning it into a book. Morrison smiled. Your fight against Victor Hale is going to be remembered for a long time, Cole. You and Eliza became symbols of what regular people can do when they refuse to be victims. We were just trying to save our ranch, Cole said. You were doing more than that, even if you didn't realize it. You were proving that justice isn't just for the powerful, that evidence and truth can overcome corruption, that 2 people with courage can change an entire system. Morrison clasped his shoulder. Be proud of what you accomplished, both of you. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Cole and Eliza found themselves alone on the porch again, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Do you ever think about that first day? Eliza asked. When I showed up as a stranger about to marry a man I'd never met? All the time. I remember thinking you were just one more burden I couldn't afford. One more complication in a life that was already falling apart. Cole's arm tightened around her. I was wrong about everything. You weren't a burden. You were salvation. Not because you saved the ranch, though you did, but because you saved me. From bitterness, from isolation, from giving up on the possibility that life could be good again. I saved you? Eliza turned to face him. Cole, you gave me something I'd never had before. A home, a purpose. Someone who saw me as more than just a convenience or a solution to someone else's problem. You made me believe I was strong enough to fight for what mattered. That's a gift I'll treasure every day of my life. They stood together in the darkness, 2 people who'd been pushed together by desperation and found something neither had been looking for. Love. Real, deep, transformative love that had grown from shared struggle and mutual respect into something unbreakable. The ranch around them was quiet, peaceful, secure. The battles had been fought and won. The enemies had been defeated and brought to justice. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. What do we do now? Cole asked softly. Eliza smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. Now we live. We work this land, raise our cattle, build something lasting. Maybe start a family if we're blessed. We help other ranchers who get into trouble pay forward what Walter and Morrison did for us. We make this ranch everything it was meant to be. Together, Cole added. Always together. He kissed her again, gentle and sure, and Eliza felt the last piece of her old life, the frightened widow with no choices and no power, fall away completely. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger and braver than she'd ever imagined she could be. They went inside together, to the home they'd fought for and won, to the life they were building brick by brick. Behind them, the ranch lay peaceful under the stars, restored and thriving. Ahead of them, tomorrow waited with all its challenges and opportunities. But they would face it the way they'd faced everything else, side by side, partners in every sense of the word, refusing to let anyone or anything break what they'd built together. In town, in a cell awaiting trial, Victor Hale sat alone with his shattered empire around him. He'd lost everything. His companies, his reputation, his freedom. The man who'd controlled an entire county through manipulation and fraud had been brought down by 2 people he'd underestimated completely, a crippled rancher and his desperate wife. Except they'd never been what he thought they were. Cole Harrow wasn't broken, he was resilient. And Eliza wasn't desperate, she was fierce. Together, they'd been unstoppable. The trial would come, the verdict was certain, and Victor would spend years paying for his crimes. But even if he'd somehow escaped legal consequences, he'd already lost what mattered most. The power he'd built, the fear he'd inspired, the control he'd wielded, all of it gone, destroyed by 2 people who refused to be victims. As autumn deepened into winter, the ranch thrived. Cole and Eliza worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. They faced the normal challenges of ranch life, difficult weather, sick cattle, equipment failures, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. On cold nights, they sat by the fire and made plans for spring. New pastures to develop, improvements to make, dreams to chase. Sometimes they talked about the fight against Victor, remembering the fear and the determination and the triumph. But mostly they focused on the future, on building rather than fighting, on creating rather than defending. "I never thanked you properly," Cole said one evening, his head resting against Eliza's shoulder as they watched flames dance in the fireplace. "For refusing to give up on me when I'd given up on myself. For seeing something worth fighting for when everyone else just saw a failed rancher. For loving me when I didn't know how to love myself." Eliza's fingers traced through his hair, gentle and sure. "You don't have to thank me for loving you, Cole. It's not something I did because I had to. It's something that happened because of who you are, stubborn and proud and brave and kind, even when you tried to hide it. I couldn't help loving you. It was inevitable from the moment you let me see past your walls." "I love you too," he said, the words coming easier now than they had at first. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. You're everything to me, Eliza. Everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, secure in each other and in what they'd built. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in white. But inside, in the home they'd fought for and won, warmth and love filled every corner. The story of Cole and Eliza Harrow would be told for years throughout the territory. The rancher who'd been written off as broken, and the wife who'd been married off as unwanted, who together had exposed corruption and brought down an empire. Their courage had inspired others to speak up, to fight back, to refuse to accept injustice. But for Cole and Eliza themselves, the story wasn't about being heroes or symbols. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was about two people who'd been forced together by necessity and chosen to stay together out of love. Who'd faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Who'd learned that strength wasn't about standing alone, but about knowing when to let someone stand beside you. It was about partnership, trust, and the transformative power of refusing to give up on justice, on hope, on each other. And it was about understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply decide that you matter, that your life has value, that you deserve to fight for what's yours. Victor Hale had believed that power came from control, from manipulation, from making others afraid. But he'd learned too late that real power came from something much simpler, from two people standing together and saying, "No more," from courage born of caring about something more than self-preservation, from the unbreakable strength of partnership built on honesty and trust. That was the power that had defeated him. That was the power that had won. And as snow fell on the ranch that had nearly been